Good afternoon. If you could find seats, I see some empty ones around still, so we don't have all of you standing up. I'm Elizabeth Taylor. I'm the Brewster representative, and I will be chairing this meeting. We have a quorum, and the Cape Cod Commission is conducting a Development of Regional Impact Review on the following project in accordance with Sections 12 and 13 of the Cape Cod Commission Act as amended and pursuant to DRI review. A commission subcommittee is holding this public hearing. The project is the Herring River Restoration Project Phase 1, Commission File Number 08009. The project applicant is the Town of Wellfleet. The project description: Phase 1 proposes to reintroduce tidal exchange to portions of the Herring River estuary system for the purpose of restoring approximately 570 acres of coastal wetlands. Phase 1 includes, without limitation, the construction and operation of various new or replacement tidal control structures within the Town of Wellfleet. Anyone wishing to testify orally will be welcome to do so. Written comments may also be submitted at the hearing. I will now let the subcommittee members introduce themselves. Starting with Charles.
I'm Charles McCaffrey, the Falmouth representative to the Cape Cod Commission.
And as I said, I'm Elizabeth Taylor, the Brewster representative.
Kevin Grunwald, Truro.
Dick Elkin, Wellfleet representative.
And Cheryl Andrews, Provincetown representative.
The order of the hearing will be as follows. We will have an applicant presentation, followed by staff comments and public testimony. And depending on how many people we have signed up, we will figure out whether we'll be limiting the number of minutes each person has to speak or not. So we will start out with the applicant presentation.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Wall. I'm an attorney at Anderson & Krieger. I represent the Friends of Herring River. We've been working with the project partners on this project for many years. The Herring River is one of the largest tidally restricted estuaries in the Northeast, as I'm sure folks in the room are aware. We think that this project has unique benefits to benefit the Outer Cape, and we look forward to telling you more about the project today. The project has been a collaborative effort over many years among many dedicated and talented true experts in wetlands and other ecological sciences. So I just wanted to give you a brief introduction to who's here tonight. We're joined by Wellfleet Town Administrator Dan Hort for the applicant, the town, Carol Ridley of the Herring River Project team, Tim Smith, Restoration Ecologist for the Cape Cod National Seashore, Steve Spear of the USDA NRCS, Steve Block from NOAA, Martha Craig, the Executive Director of the Friends of Herring River, and also Brian Karlstrom, the Superintendent of the Seashore, will be here as well, or is here as well. So just to provide a very brief recap for why we're here tonight, the project received a scoping decision in March 7th of 2019 that set forth the relevant regional policy plan goals that would apply to this project. We've submitted our application, and we're here tonight to explain the project, including its extensive benefits, and answer any questions that the Commission may have. So with that, I'd like to, if the subcommittee would be willing, turn it over to Dan Hort for a brief statement about the importance of the project to the town, and then we'll have other presentations. Thank you.
Good evening. Welcome to Wellfleet. We're glad you're here. The Herring River Restoration Project represents a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to address an aging infrastructure here in town, and at the same time to reclaim the vast benefits of the estuary of the Herring River. The Herring River was a healthy estuary prior to 1909, when the Chequesset Neck Road dike was installed. Within a few decades, the water quality began to degrade, and previously extensive salt marsh was reduced to 10% of its prior footprint. For more than a decade, the town has been working with the Cape Cod National Seashore and other state, federal, and local partners to develop a plan to reclaim this lost resource. Most of the area in Phase 1, the great majority of it, is within the Cape Cod National Seashore. But the town does own the infrastructure, the dike, that blocks the natural flow of the Herring River. The restoration plan is based on a thorough, deliberative process in which the town is sought to address existing environmental concerns and its liability under existing conditions. The project will restore healthy environmental conditions and provide the town with new resilient infrastructure. According to our DPW director, the road work associated with the project will save the town millions of dollars in road repair cost. Wellfleet requests your approval of the DRI application. This is the first of numerous environmental permits the project will need and is a vital step in our efforts to construct this project and begin to reclaim the extensive benefits of this estuary. We appreciate the Commission's thoughtful consideration of our request, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the town of Wellfleet. With that, I would like to bring up Ms. Carol Ridley is next, I believe. Is it?
Good afternoon to members of the subcommittee and everyone here joining us. My name is Carol Ridley. I'm project coordinator for the Herring River Restoration Project. And in this portion of the presentation, I'd like to give you an overview of the project and also touch on some of the key topics related to the project's consistency with the applicable goals and objectives of the regional policy plan. But first, to put this project in context, and I think Jess and Dan have done that to a degree, is to note that this is the largest salt marsh restoration project in the Northeast. And it truly is a generational opportunity to restore a native ecosystem here on Cape Cod that at one time truly was an engine for the local economy and the Outer Cape communities. So the application before the Cape Cod Commission is from the town of Wellfleet, which is obviously a major project partner, but there are numerous other federal, state, and private entities that have been involved with this project for many, many years. First and foremost, of course, the Cape Cod National Seashore, and we'll talk more about the seashore's involvement over the course of the afternoon. USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA Restoration Center are among our federal partners. From the state, the Mass Division of Ecological Restoration, and of course the Friends of Herring River, a local organization that provides administration and project management support and outreach and education. So there's been a great deal of technical information sharing throughout the development of this project by these agencies, financial support, bringing us here today. So it really is a fantastic intergovernmental partnership that has brought us forward. I also want to note the extremely strong project support, and this is really cuts across a broad spectrum of the community here on Cape Cod, across the state, and even nationally. And this is a list of some of the organizations that over the years have gone on record in support of the project. You're going to see national organizations, you're going to see statewide organizations, regional environmental leadership organizations, as well as a number of individuals and other stakeholders from Wellfleet, from the shellfishing community, floodplain property owners, business owners. I would note that in the application package that was submitted to the Cape Cod Commission, I think there were 20 some odd letters of support from these and other parties. And since the submission of the application, I think another 15 or so letters have come in, including folks whose property is directly involved with the project, strongly supporting the objectives of the restoration. And this support really is rooted in a couple of things. One is over the course of the development of this project, which began many, many years ago. I think depending upon who you ask, it could be 30 years or 20 years. It really has been percolating for a number of decades, but really began in earnest in 2005 with the first memorandum of agreement between the town of Wellfleet and the Cape Cod National Seashore to begin to look into the feasibility of restoring this cherished resource. And getting back to the broad support, throughout each stage of looking at the plan, the concept, the feasibility, developing this into a project, assessing the full-scale impacts of it, and moving it forward to bring us here today, at each step of the process, community engagement has really been baked into the framework of these memoranda. The successive memoranda are listed here that have been affected over time. The most current and active memorandum of agreement is MOU 4, which was just executed this past year and sets forth the implementation framework for the project going forward. That focuses on the Herring River Executive Council. It also names a 19-member Herring River stakeholder group, which includes representation from a broad cross-section of the community and includes technical advisory input from some of the project partners and other technical experts on an ongoing basis throughout project implementation. So over the past decade plus, we've had 60 or more public presentations, numerous technical meetings, countless meetings one-on-one with property owners who have interests or questions about the project, the open door policy at the Friends of Herring River continues to this day. All of this, I think, has really led to that broad support that you saw represented in those letters and will hear hopefully this evening. Another reason why there's broad support is this is a tremendously good idea. The objective here is to restore a 1,000-acre estuary that was once one of the most productive salt marsh estuary systems in the Northeast. So the application you have before you for Phase 1 would restore 570 acres. All of that land is jurisdictional wetlands today. 95% of it, or 540 acres, is federally owned by the Cape Cod National Seashore. Now, there are a number of good reasons why this project is moving forward. Among them, the Herring River today, because of the degradation that Dan described owing to the restricted tidal flow, water quality in Herring River is today in violation of the Federal Clean Water Act for numerous parameters, for dissolved oxygen, for bacterial contamination, for metals. As a result of the bacterial contamination, it is also designated by the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries as a point source for bacterial contamination that has already led to the closure of hundreds of acres of once productive shellfish habitat. You may hear from some folks tonight from the shellfishing community who could speak to conditions when that wasn't the case. And we feel that there is an ongoing threat posed by that bacterial contamination to shellfish resources further downstream. So this is a current problem the town is facing, and we are all facing. Another reason why this project is needed is, if you look at the figure on the screen, you can see, it's hard to see, I know, in this small screen in a big room with a lot of light, but this tan area here, this light tan area, represents that original 1,000-acre estuary. The only salt marsh remaining today is this little bit here by the dike. This is the location of the Chequasit Neck Dike. So we went from about 1,000 acres of salt marsh to about 10 acres of salt marsh. And those of us who are familiar with the important ecological benefits of salt marshes, I mean, you may have even heard them referred to as the rainforest, comparable to rainforests in terms of their productivity as an ecosystem. So a tremendous loss of salt marsh habitat and all the ecosystem services it provides. Much of that marsh plain that's now this lighter tan color, because of the loss of tidal flow and the draining of the marsh, has deteriorated. And there's a chemical process that occurs that when salt marsh peat decays, sulfuric acid is the result, which leaches into surrounding waters and degrades habitat further. So much of this marsh plain today, not only have we lost the salt marsh habitat, but much of that area is acid sulfate soils, completely inhabitable to healthy aquatic life, posing a threat of fish kills. Now, estuaries, as many of us know, have a very important role in a broader ecosystem, and that is as a nursery and spawning area for the rest of the ocean, if you will. And at one time, Herring River played that role for the Gulf of Maine fisheries. But when the dike was put in place, that was lost. So part of what we'd like to do is to make that connection a viable connection. First, bring back the estuary to its former health, and then have it once again function as a part of the food chain in the Gulf of Maine. With all of what's happened on the floodplain, we've also lost a tremendous amount of resilience to sea level rise and coastal storm surge. So another reason why we need to try to restore salt marsh, regain the elevation of our marshes, and provide that ecosystem service once again. I would also note that recently the towns of Wellfleet and Truro got together through the MVP, the Municipal Vulnerability Planning process, to identify resilience strategies and, top priority, restore our salt marshes. So this is very consistent with that objective, as well as the local comprehensive plan here in Wellfleet. So how will this project be accomplished? In essence, it's very straightforward. Remove existing tidal restrictions and incrementally restore tidal flow to the system with careful ongoing monitoring and adaptive management so that we can track changes as they are occurring and, if necessary, make adjustments in the restoration management actions. It's important to note that tidal flow at any time can be slowed or stopped or sped up. The photos, which are a little bit hard to see, are actually photos of the existing openings at the Crescent Neck Dike. You can see how small they are. And this photo, which is hard to see, but it's a picture of a very corroded tide gate. And there are engineering reports that have been done that have documented the corroded and, frankly, failed nature of some of the tide gates in that structure. So within the application, there are a number of water control features that are necessary to restore tidal flow to Herring River. First and foremost is at the entrance, the Chequesset Neck Road Dike. That would be, a portion of that dike would be removed and replaced with a state-of-the-art bridge outfitted with tide gates. There's also a dike at Poledike Creek with tide gates and the removal of a portion of High Toss Road, which now crosses the marsh. On this figure, with a different colored designation, is another structure that is also part of the project, but is not under the jurisdiction of the Cape Cod Commission because it is federally owned and on federal land. And that is another dike and water control structure with tide gates at the entrance to Mill Creek. This visual is a view of the existing Chequesset Neck Road structure. So you can see it's essentially a roadway with a earthen embankment, and then you can see the water which goes through those. Well, I'll show you a visual in a minute that shows you the actual openings there. But this was constructed originally in 1909 and was rebuilt in the mid-70s when it failed at that time. So just basic math, the tide gates are closing in on 50 years old, so nearing the end of their useful life. So this shows you just the vast difference and why we're talking about the problems that we have in the river today. So this is the this is the original opening the river had, which was about 170 feet from side to side. And this is the original, the current opening. So you have a close-up here of the 3 6-foot wide culverts. Only one of them allows water into Herring River, and that tide gate is actually frozen in position. These two only allow outflowing water. So there's only a 6-foot wide opening with a gate that's corroded in place that allows water into Herring River. So that's the extent of tidal restriction that we're talking about today. This is the new structure. A little bit of a dark visual, but hopefully you can see. The road profile does not change. But this is a structure that would be 165 feet wide, would be outfitted with a series of different types of tide gates, 9 adjustable tide gates, and 8 removable panels. So that allows incredible amount of flexibility in terms of finally managing that water control and tide level. These images are some examples of tide gates that would be used. They're not from the picture. They're not from the actual structure, obviously, but just examples of different types of tide gates that could be used in the structure. And I would just point out, I think there's often, a question about how do you actually control the water levels, and that's a little more straightforward than other things. I mean, it's really with the use of these tide gates, and they have been specifically designed based on extensive hydrodynamic modeling and working with our engineers, Fuss and O'Neill, who are here today, and others on the technical team, to develop the configuration of tide gates that provides the maximum flexibility for very fine adjustments in tide control over time. And through adaptive management, that reintroduction of tidal flow will be balanced with other restoration objectives and data collected from the system response. So as the project is implemented, it's going to be guided. It's going to be guided by a local governance and decision-making structure, and it's going to be guided by an adaptive management plan. And what's really great about this approach is that it really blends very structured, intensive science with opportunities for the public to be aware and engaged in the process, and always to retain decision-making at the local level. The local decision-making framework, which is really spelled out in MOU 4, starts with the Herring River Executive Council. There are 3 members appointed by the town of Wellfleet on the Executive Council and 2 members appointed by the Cape Cod National Seashore. And that body is responsible for approving the adaptive management plan, which guides all of the tide gate and marsh management activities. It's responsible for all of the regulatory permit compliance. And it will designate, the 5 members of that team obviously are not going to be the folks who will be adjusting the tide gates, but they will approve the protocol, and they will designate the trained folks who will be responsible for that and will be responsible to reporting back to them, as well as to their town and seashore officials, how that is proceeding. Ongoing, there is going to be regulatory oversight by a group called the Regulatory Oversight Group that was formed by the Secretary's MEPA certificate. It is made up of representatives from more than, I think, maybe 24 federal, state, county, and local governmental bodies who, on an ongoing basis, will receive information and provide feedback, kind of a permitting agency, government agency feedback loop for the project. And they will be involved ongoing. Also ongoing will be advisory input to the Executive Council from the technical team, and you heard the members introduced earlier. Stakeholders will continue to have a role through the Herring River Stakeholder Group, as well as others. And, of course, ongoing monitoring and data collection throughout the implementation process. And I want to talk a little bit about that right now. The other piece of implementation guidance is the adaptive management process. So this is a term that we're all very familiar with these days because, as you may be aware, for example, if a wastewater project wants to get designated as being compliant with the 208 Water Quality Plan, it needs to have an adaptive management component. So adaptive management is a really good approach to managing long-term environmental restoration projects because it recognizes and allows for new data and better science to be introduced, and through an iterative process of making good predictions, measuring outcomes, comparing those predictions with the measured outcomes, and using that result to adjust management decisions and to adjust your future predictions. So it's an iterative process that really builds on gaining more and more information as you carefully move forward in the implementation process. And there are a number of implementation goals that will guide the Herring River restoration process, restoring hydrography, reducing impacts, reducing costs, improving and enhancing ecosystem services. These are all the major restoration goals that the adaptive management framework will be built around. And for each of those goals, and I'm going to take the example of restoring hydrography, there are sub-goals, there are sub-objectives. So the drill down further, that's a broad statement, restore hydrography. But if you drill down, there are several components of that that will be looked at in depth as the project proceeds. And for each of those little blue boxes, there is a performance measure There are protocols for monitoring. There's thresholds for knowing whether we are where we need to be or want to be. And all of that information is woven through the adaptive management process. This is all guided by a tremendous amount of ecological monitoring. This is just a small list of things that are being monitored and will continue to be monitored. So baseline conditions, pre-construction, pre-restoration conditions are measured, then post-restoration conditions are measured, and all of that information is fed into the models and the adaptive management framework. Not listed here are a number of socioeconomic factors that are also being built into the adaptive management process that have to do with things that may be important to a community but aren't as measurable as water levels or sediment movement. But they are also important and are also factored into the adaptive management process. All of that is what will guide the management decisions that will, lead us through the restoration of Herring River. So tide gate management, there will be a protocol approved by the Executive Council. They will designate trained personnel to implement that. Vegetation management, whether it's Phragmites control or removal of woody vegetation, that will all be guided by the adaptive management plan, as will the management of the marsh plain, whether it's to elevate areas of subsidence or to augment channel work so that we can achieve our restoration goals, enhance restoration and ecosystem services. So this is, through all of that careful process of restoring the tide levels incrementally with adaptive management, all of the monitoring and tracking, at the end of phase 1, which is what we're seeking approval to do through the Cape Cod Commission, we will restore 570 acres of that original 1,000-acre salt marsh. And just to orient you with this figure, this green outlined area that's kind of green shaded and outlined, that's all Cape Cod National Seashore. That's all federally owned Cape Cod National Seashore. The reddish outline is the full restoration area, so that would be that 1,000-acre area. And the blue shaded area in here is the 570 acres that would be restored within phase 1. And just to note a couple of things about that area. I mentioned before, but bears repeating, 540 or 95% of that area, which is the phase 1 restoration area, is federally owned land within the Cape Cod National Seashore. Most of it, vast majority. All of it is currently, today, jurisdictional wetlands. So some of it will be wetlands that experiences a change in tidal hydrology. So it may be mostly fresh today and may become saltier. So there may be changes in vegetation that occur, but it is currently jurisdictional wetlands. Of the 30 acres that is privately owned, about a third of it is Chequesset Yacht and Country Club, who have written a letter in support of the project, and we continue to work with to develop measures to protect their property. The Wellfleet Conservation Trust, also on record in support of the project. And there are remaining 11 acres, which are pieces of approximately 11 residential parcels, where again, there would be some change of tidal hydrology so that there could be some changes in wetlands, in wetlands vegetation on those parcels. But I also want to note that this project is proceeding under the Wetlands Protection Act as an ecological restoration limited project. And it was acknowledged in the staff report that this project fits the criteria for that designation. For that, we need to make sure that we are protecting the built environment. So all public and private structures that have any potential from an impact within phase 1 restoration will be protected. That mitigation will happen and it will be in place prior to any tidal flow that could affect that structure. All of those measures to protect those structures are being designed for full restoration, even though we are seeking permission for phase 1. It's prudent and cost-effective in terms of public resources to invest in making those measures able to protect a property for full restoration, because we do hope to be able to come back and obtain new permits for that in later phase. So what are those measures? I've mentioned the golf course, so we are working with them in terms of elevating portions of the golf course to protect against flood impacts. There are some measures on 3 private properties. 2 of them are really moving wells that it's out of an abundance of caution, but nevertheless, that's 2 wells to be relocated, and 1 other property that requires some measures. There are some segments of public roads that will be elevated and culverts replaced. I would note that the Wellfleet DPW director has noted that will save the town millions of dollars in otherwise needed road repairs and result in more resilient infrastructure. And there will be a structure put on on federal land on the Cape Cod National Seashore that would protect 2 other properties. So that is a quick run through the project and the mitigation that's required. I'll just take a few minutes, if I may, to run through a couple of issue areas that are in our application dealing with some of the RPP goals and objectives. So this is a list of the goals and objectives that we were scoped for. It was, I think Jess mentioned earlier that we received a scoping decision just about a year ago. And that really was intended to focus the Commission's review on the issues that are of greatest regional significance. So we have water resources objectives, wetland resources objectives, wildlife plant habitat, community design, coastal resiliency, transportation, and cultural heritage. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but I did want to talk about a couple of them. First, with respect to community design and the design of the Chequesset Neck Road Bridge, because it is going to be a change. There was a lot of public process around this design effort that involved public meetings. It involved input from police and fire and DPW officials, work with the select board, work with the Cape Cod National Seashore to look at costs, to look at materials, to look at aesthetics, natural resource impacts, ADA accessibility, a wide range of factors. You know, it is an opportunity to enhance public access to the water, which is always a good thing to do. Even though, you know, all of us who live on Cape Cod know as much as there's water all around us, sometimes it's hard to get to. And so when we have an opportunity with a new public project to enhance our ability to enjoy our natural coastal resources, it's an important thing to do. So that's been built into this as well. One of the comments that was in the staff report made a great deal of sense, which is to be sure that this is a safe passage for bikes and pedestrians. So we will work with the emergency folks in Wellfleet on appropriate signage for that, both during construction and afterward. So we appreciated that comment. With respect to water resources, myriad benefits of this project. First and foremost, to deal with the severe impairment and the issues that take us out of compliance with Federal Clean Water Act. And we hope to improve that to a point where we are in compliance with the Federal Clean Water Act. And also deal with the bacterial problem so that we hopefully over time will see DMF measuring and reopening the shellfish beds downstream, and possibly in future years, and maybe many future years ahead, seeing some shellfish habitat in the system itself. It's important to note that stormwater management is significantly improved by this project, certainly at the bridge, where there will be some treatment built into the structure, but also along those roadway segments that will be elevated, where there's currently no drainage. There will be drainage improvements as part of the design there. They're more in the non-structural aspect, but still, nevertheless, will improve stormwater management along those roadway segments. The project has been recognized in other documents produced by the Commission and by the town officials as being beneficial to the problems of nitrogen loading in Wellfleet Harbor. So another benefit there. We included in our submission a study that extensively documents that all drinking water wells will be protected. The very small number that we identified that could potentially have a problem, we are proposing to relocate, as I mentioned earlier. And there is no effect from leachate from the nearby landfill. I'm just mentioning that because it was raised in an earlier 2016 letter from the Commission, and some folks asked the question. But the restoration project will not change the distance of surface water to the landfill, which is currently and will remain more than 500 feet. nor will it change groundwater elevations or the direction of flow of groundwater. So there's really no issue there with respect to the landfill. With respect to wetlands, obviously another important area of benefit, we will recover 570 acres of salt marsh habitat. There will be no net loss of wetland function. There will be a transition happening, however, from a variety of invasive species and woody vegetation to more salt-tolerant estuarine forms of wetland vegetation. And we will be removing invasive species from the system. All of this, too, will enhance resilience. As salt marsh is returned, as the marsh gains in elevation, it will enhance resilience to the entire floodplain. And I will mention a new topic that you're going to be hearing more about is the fact that healthy salt marshes absorb carbon. They're a carbon sink. And so what's happened with Herring River over these many, many years is that we've lost that benefit. And moreover, we've created a situation where we have ponded freshwater wetlands that emit methane. So it's kind of like the double whammy. We have a very intensive heat trapping gas being emitted, and we've lost the carbon sequestration benefits of the salt marsh. So we hope to reverse that with the restoration. And provide all the natural buffer to the floodplain, as I mentioned. I thought it would be interesting to show you a couple of visuals of these are actual salt marsh restoration projects, and just to see how this transition can occur. So this is Hatches Harbor, this area outlined here. And in these two examples, within 3 to 5 years, you're going to see the marsh transition from mudflat to, in this case, lush marsh. From 1999 here, mudflat, you can see little tufts of salt marsh emerging in 2001. Here's 2003, a little more salt marsh grass, and then here's, does that say 2006? My eyesight's pretty bad. But in just I think that's about 7-year cycle, you see that reemergence of salt grass occurring. So a good local example of how that transition can occur. And here's another example from Revere, Mass, where again, in just, I guess in this case, just a few years, we see Phragmites to mudflat to Salicornia, which grows pretty quickly, and then the next transition to salt marsh. So from 1988 to 2001. Is that 98? And then the last topic I just wanted to touch on is habitat, because this project will restore habitat to a wide variety of species. Herring River is named for herring, and yet we have numerous barriers to their migration and health in the system today. So we want to restore that vibrant herring fishery and rebuild that. This would also provide habitat for other species such as striped bass, diamondback terrapin, winter flounder. I mentioned earlier the Gulf of Maine connection that we hope to restore so that we truly restore the estuarine functioning of Herring River and its value for the greater coastal resources. And I would note that we've been working very closely with the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program to develop a habitat management plan for any state-listed species that could be involved with the restoration process. And lastly, I would note, with respect to mosquito control, it's a bit ironic because the rationale that was given for the building of the dike back in 1909, one of them anyway, was to control mosquitoes. And actually the opposite happened. There was an increase in mosquito problems, nuisance, and increased spending by the town to deal with that problem in the years right following the dike construction. And the reason for that is that what happened by restricting tidal flow is that predator fish that feed on larvae, mosquito larvae, were not able to get to the larvae and consume them. And also some of the changes in water quality, such as ponded, acidic waters, the larvae could sustain in those conditions, whereas some of the aquatic life that would be predators to them could not. So by restoring that natural balance, we believe we will be restoring that natural mosquito control also as part of this project. So I will stop there, and I appreciate your time and patience with the presentation, and we will be happy, of course, to answer any questions later on. And I think at this point,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will probably do questions after staff presentation.
Okay, very good. If I may, I believe we have one more statement from Superintendent Brian Karlstrom, if you could Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Brian Carlstrom, the superintendent at Cape Cod National Seashore, and I'm thrilled to be here this evening. Thank you for holding the meeting, commissioners. And there's over 130 of you in the room tonight to restore a wetland. That's the interest that's brought you here. This has been an ongoing effort with a groundswell of community support and concern with one significant goal in mind: to correct an impaired water quality condition within the national seashore. That is an untenable condition. We're going to do and continue to do everything we can to restore that. Right now, we're poised to repair it. Got a long way to go yet, but the ultimate goal, as some of those slides that Carol showed earlier, is to have a highly functional wetland that's part of the broader Gulf of Maine ecosystem that is functioning in a healthy state. We're poised to accomplish that long-standing goal. It's going to have numerous benefits for the environment itself, for the citizens of Wellfleet, for the citizens of the state of Massachusetts, all the 4 million and some visitors that come from across the country and internationally. It's a huge, huge effort. The significance of this has got national attention within the National Park Service and of the National Park Foundation to provide funds to go towards it. We're going to keep working on this until we have a restored wetland in place. We have a very prescribed, very detailed adaptive management plan that we will be executing with a lot of discernment as we move through the effort. And we're thrilled to move on to the next stage. This is a milestone point for the entire project, and I appreciate everyone being here. We look forward to hearing your questions, concerns, and sharing additional information and continuing to engage with you through the entire process. Thank you.
Thank you. John Eidman will now provide the Cape Cod Commission staff comments. And if you would also introduce any staff who are here, I'd appreciate that.
I will.
Thank you.
Thank you. John Eidman, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Jordan Bellozo, regulatory staff. And I'm going to ask if my colleagues can introduce themselves, because I know they can do that. And I'm looking at them. Yeah, thank you. So as the hearing proceeds tonight, staff is available for questions, to provide additional comment, and anything we can't answer tonight, we're happy to take back to the office, analyze further, and bring questions back to the subcommittee. I'm going to try to be as brief as possible. I know that there are an awful lot of people who'd like to speak, and the staff report largely speaks for itself. So I just want to go over some higher level observations staff had in drafting the staff report and that appear in the staff report. The report doesn't identify any major issues or inconsistencies with regional policies set out in the RPP or the supporting technical bulletins to that RPP. And in fact, identifies many areas where staff was comfortable suggesting after its internal review and prior to this hearing that the project meets and promotes a variety of regional policies. There's no doubt this is a project of regional significance, which is the hallmark of the Commission's jurisdiction and its level of review. And at the heart of DRI review, the project really needs to be determined on balance. Recognizing that with any program of this scope, there will necessarily be some recognized impacts or consequences, at least from some individual's perspective. But at a very high level, there are a number of overwhelming benefits with this project, even on the face of the project. In all, staff's feeling was that this was not a project where there should be real doubts about moving forward with it or its approval. but that the focus of review should really be about how best to move forward with the project in a balanced way to ensure or confirm that resources and basic property concerns are met while still achieving the project purposes and regional policies. As staff has previously said, including in the subcommittee hearing that took place almost 5 years ago now, that focus should really then be how best to structure the adaptive management plan and establish particular criteria in the adaptive management plan. Staff has been pleased with the continued development of the adaptive management plan over the number of years staff has worked with it, and recognizes that the purpose of the AMP is not to predict with certainty what the outcomes will be, but its use is primarily as a long-term decision-making tool to bring the relevant variables into play as those decisions are made, and to make the best decisions possible in light of the sometimes competing variables involved. I would agree that there's a very unique opportunity here with this project, and to give some substance to what it means to be unique and have a unique opportunity. There are many places on Cape Cod that you may want to undertake these sort of restorations, but because of practical and legal impediments, those things can't happen. In this particular case, we have, what was the number? 95% of the property in public ownership. And, relatively speaking, sparse development in this area. And also the ability to actually reverse and track the history in the estuary system, which provides this very unique opportunity where even if it's a valuable undertaking, it just really can't be done in other parts of the Cape. There's also, looking at this project relative to other developments of regional impact, the Commission typically looks at, it's a very unique project. In fact, I use the term project, but it is really more like a municipal plan. And it's intensely about the public interest. There's no other underlying motive here than to bring the estuary back with all the corresponding benefits that would go along with that in terms of environmental health, social health, and economic health. Staff was particularly struck by and comforted by the gradual or incremental nature of the reintroduced floodwaters, which can be adjusted through supporting actions through the adaptive management plan. The entire project doesn't need to be done at the time a decision is rendered. The adaptive management tool is a powerful tool to allow adjustments throughout the long-term life of a project. Also comforted that the project has now been structured, at least what's before you today, as a phase one. So there's a commitment only to flood up to a certain water level in the Herring River, which itself is a form of restraint, not to essentially at this time to do the entire restoration that was envisioned in the MEPA and NEPA filings. Kind of have this phase one be a test, if you will, and have to go seek commission approval and other regulatory approvals if there is any restoration proposed over and above this phase one. Also of comfort was this idea that there will be no title exchange allowed until all the major infrastructure is actually installed and operational. Other elements that gave staff some comfort is this idea of the governance of the project. The town CEOs actually will be the project CEOs, which is an important consideration given that the Board of Selectmen are the principal fiduciaries for the town. And there are many issues that will go outside the permitting and certainly outside the Commission's permitting that really need to be discussed at the community level as kind of non-permitting but still important activities for the community. The Commission staff report flagged a number of issues, and those weren't concerns as much as prompts to have the applicant team, which I think they've done, discuss some of the issues more with the public and more with the subcommittee. Now, staff has spent an awful lot of time with this project, either through the regulatory oversight group, which was established under MIPA Special Review Procedure, or just discussing this project with the town prior to the development of the DRI application. So staff has been working with these issues for a number of years. We wanted to bring that same level of information to the subcommittee itself. So some of the requests for information or some of the requests for further discussion were intended as prompts so the applicant team could discuss these issues with the subcommittee. There were also requests for further materials. These were in the nature of things that staff really envisioned would be provided as conditions of approval. That would be provided and with some level of detail, but probably wouldn't be provided prior to any decision. There are things like erosion control, which are important, but given a project of this extent, you can't really expect that those sorts of details would be worked out now. But they could certainly fall into kind of a decision framework that's established in the decision to be provided post-decision if this is approved. The staff report principally deals with those relevant RPP issue areas that you heard were set out in the CPR scoping decision from last year. And I just want to give some sort of idea how the current RPP is quite adept at dealing with all of these relevant issues, but dealing with it in very different ways than the typical sorts of DRI projects the commission or subcommittee or CPR typically looks at. For instance, with water resources, generally the concern in the variety of different water resource objectives is excess nitrogen loading. It's not really as much of a concern here. There's no substantial new source of nitrogen loads. The emphasis was much more on, particular to this project, ensuring that increased floodwaters or velocities don't mobilize particular contaminants and detrimentally impair a variety of different water resources. Also, the particular issue of water quality staff looked at here, again, isn't nitrogen, aren't nutrients, but it is looking at the total maximum daily loads for other sorts of compounds for which the water quality in the estuary is impaired today, things like bacteria and low oxygen, et cetera. So it's enough for the applicant, I think in staff's opinion, just to come forward to actually meet the law through this project, because the water quality and the conditions in the estuary are not meeting the law today. And of course, you're talking about a federal actor and federally owned property not meeting federal standards for water quality. Another important issue staff looked at here was community design. Again, what the commission typically looks at in community design is sort of building design or site arrangements. That's not particularly applicable here, but what is applicable in terms of community design is ensuring that the particular types of infrastructure, construction associated with the project doesn't detrimentally impair the desirable character and the open quality out in the system today. So you heard in the staff report and also heard from the applicant that they were quite careful about balancing the variety of interests, both public access, environmental management, and the purpose for infrastructure like the new Chequesset Neck bridge. It's one of the prompts that staff provided in the staff report to ensure that there is the appropriate balance between designing infrastructure that's consistent with a desirable character out in this area, but also is of the least impactful footprint and at the same time provides increased public access to that area. Staff's primary focus here was on the variety of natural resources issues, primarily wetlands and habitat, which are really at the heart of the project, really at the heart of this project. Staff's analysis factored in the proposed actions which are integrated in the project to mitigate impacts on private properties. And I just want to stay with that for a second. It's a very unusual project in that mitigation often comes out of a permitting negotiation with a reviewing agency. In this particular case, that proposed mitigation specifically for private properties here, has been integrated into the project in chief. And I just want to, with the Commission's review, I just also want to underscore that its review for these wetland and habitat issues are going to be a little bit different than the local Conservation Commission's review. The Commission's review is higher level, it's at a policy level, and the Conservation Commission's review is going to be quite granular and probably deal more specifically with properties on a parcel by parcel basis. The benefit the Commission had in looking at the wetlands and habitat issues under broad goals and objectives for the same in the policy plan was to be able to recognize that there was a natural or native state of this ecosystem that was trackable only 100 years ago. So in looking at the wetlands and habitat restoration goals, we're able to look at a natural or native ecosystem that existed only 100 years ago and look at the Commission's objectives and goals as to trying to the desirable wetland system meeting that system that existed about 100 years ago. Often when you look at wetlands permits at the local level, it looks to prevent any alteration of a wetland here. The advantage we have under the Commission's policies is it fully contemplates that restoration is going to be an allowable wetlands activity so long as you're restoring a native or natural type of ecosystem that exists in this particular case. I'm just going to end with a discussion about the adaptive management plan briefly. It's very interesting because what the adaptive management plan has done, other than just look at the project purposes, is incorporated the relevant goals and objectives from the policy plan into it. So you can see the adaptive management plan on that basis is aligning with the policy plan as well. One thing we will want to discuss as we move forward, I can tell already, is perhaps as the subcommittee looks towards a recommendation in its future meetings or hearings, trying to establish kind of a sequence of certain events to incorporate in the decision to align with the adaptive management plan that's already been provided to you in detail. So with that, I will cede to the next public comments and public official comments at the hearing. And again, staff is here if you have any questions or can't answer the questions tonight, would be happy to take them back internally to the office and bring you responses at your future proceedings.
Thank you very much, John. Do commission members have any questions or comments? Charles?
Yes, obviously the adaptive management is an essential part of this, as John just said. Can you give us a feel for what some of the specific measures are that will trigger adaptive management and expected timing of some of that? Because it's fairly general in the application. For example, on the water quality, what is the current classification? And I assume is the goal to be SA? And what's your expectations in how you would get there, and what measures might trigger a reevaluation of your approach?
So we're absolutely happy to answer questions about the adaptive management plan. It's a hugely important part of the project. I think the true expert on that would be Tim Smith, who's here tonight. So I think Tim is probably the best person to speak to those concerns. So Tim.
Thanks. I'm Tim Smith, restoration ecologist at the Seashore. So I think the way to kind of describe the adaptive management plan is basically for those objectives that Carol showed before, ecological objectives, things like water quality, tide heights, sediment dynamics. We're using baseline monitoring to establish the known range of those now in existing conditions, and then making predictions about using models and expert judgment to make predictions of what those will be in the future under varied future tide regimes. And basically the idea is that as we implement the project and increase tide range, we would expect to see changes within those range of predictions, the range of variability of the predictions. And then that is sort of giving us the feedback that things are progressing as we've predicted, as we expect. And then if things are above or below those ranges of expected variation, we would take then a different course with respect to any of the proposed management actions, whether it's the magnitude of changing tide gates or the other management actions that could be contemplated. So it's not really so much specific threshold kind of effects, but more looking at the expected range that we expect things to be changing as tide hydrology changes.
But I assume you do have estimate-specific measures that you would use to trigger.
Certainly.
I mean, I'm just looking for a feel for what some of that, the specifics might be in any, just as an example of one of the,
Well,
like the water quality, if your goal is, I assume, is to go from whatever it is now, C to, or D to SA, that's an example. I mean,
well, we're looking at more specific numerical quantitative sort of measures. So generally, a simple way to think of it is that we expect the river to more resemble the conditions in the harbor. As it gets saltier, as it gets higher tide range, the harbor is, just to some degree, kind of the reference point that or the target point that we're going to. So if we're looking at any water quality constituent, whether it's dissolved oxygen, salinity, things like that, we expect conditions in the river to reach toward the conditions in the harbor and other unimpaired systems.
Relative to that, another example of looking for something more specific is you talk about sea level rise and you'll accommodate. What is the projected sea level rise that you're using?
Well, obviously those numbers change frequently.
Well, yes and no. They do, but what are you using to
Well, in our hydrodynamic
design?
model,
If you're going to design something,
right.
you need to base it on some predicted level of sea level rise.
Well, because those predictions are varying and will continue to vary and change, we've designed freeboard into the project. And bear in mind that the system above the dike is under control of the project managers. So the project can be managed around what's happening to sea level rise in the harbor with the water control structures. But the design is based on the storm of record occurring in the blizzard of '78. So all the mitigation is based on that storm reoccurring.
And if it's much greater than that, are you designed for that as well?
Yes, there's freeboard built in all the mitigation.
And what is the level of freeboard?
2 feet.
2 feet?
2 feet above, yes. So we have hydrodynamic modeling that shows predicted tide heights with the storm of record, blizzard 78, occurring in the harbor. So that's creating a future tide elevation of X. All the mitigation is 2 feet above X.
So if we have 4 feet of sea level rise in the next 50 years, you're not designed for that?
Well, in 50 years, I mean, the lifespan of the dike is probably, of the new dike, is in the 50 to 75-year time frame.
So a reasonable projection would be 4 feet of sea level rise.
So in that case, there's other data sources that show water begins to enter the system from other locations other than just where the dike is, from Powers Landing and from Duck Harbor. So in that case, that's not, the project isn't taking on the flood protection to that magnitude. Those are other more general, regional sort of things that are kind of beyond the scope of the project.
And how will those, if they occur, affect the project?
Well, then we have water coming in the system from other locations. That's not something the project can manage for or around. I mean, that's a tremendous change in tide heights.
Thank you.
Any other questions from commission members? All right, do we have the list?
You might want to proceed with public officials first, and I'll get the list and the...
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Do we have any federal officials who wish to speak? State officials? Local officials? If you would step forward and please identify yourself.
Is this working? Yep. I'm speaking as a member of the Wellfleet Select Board who sat in for many years on the various meetings, and my God, 60? That sounds about right. I want to address the question that was just asked, speaking not as a representative of the Select Board, but as the person I just described. So part of what we want to do is turn that wetland, that ex-wetland, into the beautiful absorbent sponge it used to be, which is one of the best ways to absorb water. And with sea level rise, in addition to what Tim Smith said, if we restore the capacity of that sponge, which will happen not right away, but slowly, that will improve that situation because we know there's going to be sea level rise. Will it happen fast enough? I don't know, but it's better to do it than not.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to thank the subcommittee for joining us here tonight in Wellfleet. We've all looked forward to this hearing.
Would you identify yourself, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Kathleen Bacon. I'm Vice Chair of the Wellfleet Select Board.
Thank you.
I want to highlight just a few things that have already been pointed out by Carol. Phase 1 will restore 570 acres of severely degraded estuarine habitat. 2, 95% of the Phase 1 restoration area, comprising of 540 acres, is owned by the federal government in the Cape Cod National Seashore. 3, all public and private structures are to be protected from any adverse impact from the restoration. 4, restoration of tidal flow will happen incrementally while system responses are carefully monitored. This is the adaptive management that's been talked about greatly already. 5, project has been from the very beginning, and this hasn't been something that has been brought up as of yet tonight, has been committed to transparency, and it will continue to do so as we go forward. Lastly, from myself, the benefits to the environment in the town of Wellfleet are going to be significant. Significant in that it will return the herring to us. We dropped the gate on a 1.5 million industry of herring that took place at the turn of the century before 1909. We were on the map for herring, not oysters at that time, and we dropped the door on that. A 200+ acre shellfish habitat will be restored to be healthy again for shellfish. And we will also be able to see the bountiful return of larger finfish. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the town to undo environmental damage that was created in 1909 when the Check Neck Dike was built. Last but not least, I'd like to make a mention for Don Palladino, who died prior to this project being finished. He championed the efforts of the Friends of the Herring River, and it was his hope that we'd see this through. So thank you for being here again tonight.
Thank you. I will turn to the lady on the podium, please.
Good evening. I'm Janet Reinhardt. I'm chair of the Wellfleet Select Board, and I've been asked to read a letter of support from Senator Sear and Representative Peake. Although unable to attend the hearing today, we wish to reaffirm our strong support for the Herring River Restoration Project in Truro and Wellfleet as you open the public hearing for this Development of Regional Impact Review. The application before you will allow the restoration of 570 acres of native tidal wetlands by returning tidal flow to the estuary incrementally using a rigorous adaptive management approach. This project is a rare and significant opportunity to restore a native ecosystem and the many environmental and economic benefits it provides to the communities of Wellfleet, Truro, the region, and the Commonwealth. Healthy salt marshes and other forms of estuarine wetlands provide critical habitat for a wide variety of birds and wildlife and serve as nurseries for fish and shellfish. Estuarine habitats are more resilient to coastal flooding, and they help to filter nutrients and other pollutants from runoff and rainfall before they enter the estuary. Healthy tidal marshes also play a key role in combating climate change. Preliminary estimates based on current science indicate that restoration of salt marsh in the Herring River would result in a substantial reduction in the net volume of greenhouse gases released to the atmosphere. This includes the avoidance of methane emissions, which is more potent than carbon dioxide as a heat-trapping gas in the atmosphere. Over time, the reduction of carbon and methane emissions could be the equivalent of taking several hundred cars off the road each year. A collaborative of local, state, and federal partners has been central to the project's success. This partnership has enabled the project to benefit from vast technical knowledge and experience while ensuring that decisions about project design and implementation remain local and responsive to community needs. The Herring River restoration is one of the most significant projects of its kind in the Northeast. It exemplifies the exciting potential of the emerging blue economy on Cape Cod by utilizing modeling and management techniques that are at the leading edge of coastal restoration science. The example of Herring River as a successful coastal restoration project could benefit other estuaries on the Cape and beyond. We look forward to working with the town of Wellfleet and other project partners to ensure the success of the Herring River Restoration Project. Thank you for your consideration of these comments from the Honorable Julian Sear and the Honorable Sarah Peak.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Do you want me to give
There was
this
a gentleman
as
over here in line for local official. He was standing up. Nope. Are you local official?
I'm reading for a local official if you want to go in that kind of order. but-
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
My name is Katie Murphy. I co-own and operate Field Point Oyster Farm with my partner, Michael DeVasto, who is a Wellfleet selectman, and I will read what he has written. I am from a shellfishing family that has been working the tide for 35 years. We currently derive nearly 100% of our income from shellfish farming in Wellfleet Harbor. Oh, I should also say I'm a member of the board of the Herring River. The Herring River is in a severely impaired state. Leaving it alone is not an option. It poses risks to our water quality and to the shellfish beds surrounding the mouth of the restricted salt marsh. Currently, the river suffers from a lack of tidal exchange and a lack of dilution. Changing the current state to a vertical gate system will allow a return of tidal flow in a measured, controlled manner that uses field science and adaptive management to determine its progress. The management of the project will be determined by a multi-stakeholder council. This ensures that the town's interests will be represented in every decision. We know from the breach in the dike that happened in the early 70s that water quality improved enough for shellfish to return to the area. The breach had no controls. This project has layer upon layer of controls and protections. This project is based on sound science and over 30 years of research. If left alone, the river poses a real threat of expanded shellfish closures. The dike is at the end of its useful life and will need replacing. The Herring River Restoration Project heads off the dike's inevitable failure, saving the town tens of millions of dollars and the prospect of deciding what to do when it fails. Thank you, Michael DeVasto, Wellfleet selectman, co-owner, Field Point Oyster Farm. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other local officials? Yes, ma'am?
Hi, I'm not state, I'm not local, I'm kind of in between. I'm the superintendent of Cape Cod Mosquito Control Project. We're a quasi-state organization. Quasi. And I'd just like to read a statement. Obviously, my concern is the mosquito populations in the area. Cape Cod Mosquito Control has collaborated with a number of different agencies on salt marsh restoration projects. Our mandate to control mosquito populations often overlaps with restoration goals of improving the movement of water and giving predatory fish access to a previously inaccessible site. We've rarely seen an increase in mosquito populations in projects that we've worked on. There was one instance in the Hatches Harbor Restoration Project in Provincetown where there was an initial increase in the mosquito population. We worked collaboratively with the National Park Service and took steps to permanently bring the mosquito population back down. We will be part of the planning project and implementation of the Herring River Restoration Project, and with all agencies to mitigate, and work with all agencies to mitigate any concerns related to mosquito populations and foster restoration goals.
Thank you very much. If that is all of the local officials?
Zach Dixon, Shellfish Advisory Board member.
Okay.
And I'm also the representative to the Herring River Stakeholders Group, representing the shellfishing community. I think that the project enjoys fairly broad support from the shellfish community. However, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the question that comes up every single time I speak to those people in my community, which is what happens to those of us who are working shellfish grants or picking shellfish in the wild, who live paycheck to paycheck if there is an unforeseen negative impact on our industry, a shutdown, a disease, a death.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Did you have a response for that? Is there a local, I assume that might be covered by local representatives, I mean the town itself, or is that something that would be part of your process?
So we're happy to, depending on what the commission would prefer, answer questions as they come in, or we could also address them all at the end, depending. So if you'd like, we can have somebody, I believe that the Wellfleet Shellfish Constable was planning on making it, and she might be here later, or there's also other folks from the project team who are happy to speak to it.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to go through this list. Hopefully I don't slaughter people's names. The first one is Nick Piccinello or Picarello. Yeah, he was. That's all right. Mark Robinson.
Thank you. Mark Robinson, the Executive Director of the Compact of Cape Cod Conservation Trusts. And in that capacity, I've been advising both the town of Wellfleet and the Wellfleet Conservation Trust on preserving open space throughout the town since 1986. And it's been a great joy to see little bits of Wellfleet being preserved and, as we call it, saved. Saved from what? Saved from development, primarily. But why do we save land? We save land to preserve all the natural resources for which the land is the base, and in particular, it's the water quality. One of my first projects when I came down to the Cape as a young natural resource planner in 1984 was to work with the Truro Conservation Trust to provide a Pamet River management plan. And it was kind of a unique thing at the time to identify all the resources of an estuary and decide how they could best be managed for conservation and ecosystem protection. But what I found very early on was that I counted them. There were 16 tidal restrictions, dikes, culverts. Nobody had been counting them at that time, but they were for roads, they were for the railroad, they were for the farmers to make swamp gardens out of bits of salt marsh. And collectively, they had provided this incredibly impaired system, which we call the Pamet River. We've seen the same thing with East Harbor, which is now Pilgrim Lake in North Truro. Hopefully, these are properties or ecosystems that can benefit from a success story here in Wellfleet on a smaller scale. We need to restore these systems that have been degraded. And I think this is the most thoughtful, rational approach to any kind of ecosystem restoration that I've seen in my career. The late John Sawhill, who was the president of the Nature Conservancy for a long time, said that civilization is defined not so much by what we save, but what we refuse to destroy. I'd like to paraphrase that and say that this project we are choosing to restore. And that's going to bring hope to a lot of people and hope is in short supply.
Thank you very much. A lot of you may have sent in letters or emails, and we have read them all. So if you decide to speak tonight, we'd appreciate it if you bring up new points that you haven't already brought to our attention. The next person is Bob Wallace. Yep, thank you.
I did write a letter. I don't know if you got it.
We got everything.
Okay, well, it was last night or early this morning. But I'll be short and sweet. I do concur with other statements that have been made, and those are much more elaborate than mine, but I'd like to just give you a point. I'm writing in support of the Herring River Dike project. As someone in the shellfish growing business, I think it would be a boost to the future of Wellfleet Harbor and the shellfish industry. I was both assistant and shellfish constable from 77 to 82. When I started the job, it was just after the dike breach had occurred. There had been a set of oysters on the pine trees that were back there and soft-shell clams behind the dike. This was apparently due to the fresh flow of salt water behind the dike. After the repair, I don't think that ever happened again. What has naturally occurred from the presence of the dike itself seems to be a negative to the shell fisheries. Toxins have been building up that seemingly would be mitigated by the fresh flow of salt water to the estuary. Some in the shellfish community, however, think these toxins would seep into the healthy side of the dike to the detriment of the shellfish. I think with the proper safeguards in place to mitigate these concerns, the outcome would be a plus for the shell fishery. Indeed, not doing the project could be a detriment to the health of the harbor.
Thank you very much. The next few people are Chris, I think it's Merle, and then Eliza Cox and Melissa Lowe.
Hello, how you doing? My name is Chris Merle, and I'm a 40-year plus resident of Wellfleet, aquaculture lease site holder at the mouth of Herring River, and a homeowner in the High Toss View area. Some of the concerns about the shellfishing beds being impacted, I'm sure are going to be answered because they've already been stated. But I was also wondering about what the flood zone in homes in the area, if it would be changed. Are a lot of homes going to be impacted that were not in a flood zone and now would be? And if so, what is going to be done about that? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did you want to do a quick response? Sure. Thank you.
Steve Spear, I'm on the Herring River Restoration Team with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. If you're referring to the FEMA flood zone, there will be no change in that because the highest water levels that can get through the dike are lower than what FEMA is using. So no one will have their flood insurance status changed by the project.
Thank you. Liza?
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. For the record, Liza Cox. I'm an attorney with Nutter, McLennan & Fish in Hyannis. I'm also a Wellfleet resident.
Turn the microphone a little, or
better?
raise it maybe a little.
There we go. I'll step closer, too. I'm here this evening on behalf of the Chequesset Yacht and Country Club. We did submit a letter of support, which should be in your file. The club owns approximately 100 acres adjacent to the project site, and so it is a directly impacted stakeholder in this project. The club has been working with the project proponents for years to discuss the project and how it may impact the club, and also to develop plans and agreements to put in place so that the club will not be impacted and will be protected from this restoration and protected from any adverse impact. These measures will involve work on the club property, as is detailed in the applications that have been submitted. We're continuing to engage in conversation with the town and the project stakeholders, but wanted tonight to be here on behalf of the club to indicate our support for this request.
Thank you very much. Melissa Lowe?
Hi, good evening. Thank you again for holding this public hearing. And
My name is Melissa Lowe. I work for Mass Audubon at the Wellfleet Bay Wildlife Sanctuary, and I'm here on behalf of Mass Audubon, and just want to say that Mass Audubon strongly supports this project, this important restoration project, and we urge that it be reviewed and permitted quickly. As we all have heard, it's the largest salt marsh restoration project in Massachusetts, and it will provide important benefits for both the natural resources as well as the humans in our community. And we know, of course, the important role that salt marshes play. You know, everything from in providing important, healthy habitats for diversity of wildlife, from migratory birds, anadromous fish, threatened species like diamondback terrapins, as well as salt marsh sparrows. Salt marshes are also important for commercially important finfish and shellfish, as we've been hearing, and of course provide important recreational opportunities. Fishing, kayaking, which is so important, what our economy is built on here, among the many things our economy is built on. And in light of our changing climate, salt marshes play an important role, as we've heard, in buffering the uplands and absorbing energy from storm surges as those increase, as well as important carbon sinks, as we've been hearing about. And of course, more than 100 years ago, as the Herring River was a healthy and productive habitat and provided all of those important roles that we just heard about, but with the construction of the dike and the restoration and impediment of the restoration, that all has changed. So we do, of course, encourage and support the restoration, and as we've been hearing about all the impacts earlier tonight, that will help to improve and resolve those. And as we've also heard, this project has gone through decades of extensive and rigorous scientific modeling, engineering studies, and adaptive management planning, as well as thoughtful public outreach and education. And actually, 25 years ago, when I first started at Wellfleet Bay, that was one of the first public programs I organized, was a program with John Portnoy, the ecologist at the seashore on the Herring River. So it's really exciting to see it come to this process with an opportunity to move forward and get it into the final permitting stages. So thank you very much for that opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Dwight Estey. And after that, Irene Deitch, and then Margot Fenn.
Good evening. My name is Martin Neske. I am the fortunate owner of the property at 505 Old Chequesset Neck Road in Wellfleet. I am fortunate that I love this town. I love the whole idea of what you're doing. But there are some problems, I think, in the permitting stage. I'm not sure have been brought to everybody's attention. As a blind man can see the support in the room for the project. We keep talking about the 95% of the land that's in public part of the seashore, but how about the 5% of us that aren't? I've been dealing with this for 25 years, have not got a reasonable satisfaction answer from this fellow or any of these other people that I've been talking to for years. The first proposition that they gave to me at the cost of $40,000 of great plans and of filling my cellar with gravel, flooding my property. That wasn't particularly attractive to my family and me. And I'm serious, we're talking about 6 feet of gravel in my cellar, which would make my garage unusable, my double sliding glass door, my man door, my furnace, my well, my septic, my heating system, everything else would be unusable. Then the suggestion was that they put a berm around the house, which I could jump off onto. The berm would be 6 feet high and 9 feet wide. And I was told I was going to see all these shellfish magically appearing in my backyard, of which, of course, the public would have access to. I was also told I'd be able to take my kayak down to Wellfleet Harbor. Now, let's keep in mind that this stream is only this wide and this deep right now. So the two berm ideas didn't wash. We talked about moving my well. I thought we'd made an agreement on that. And then when I finally came up with a proposition that made sense to me and would certainly make sense to them, they refused the last offer that I made. And nothing was ever written anywhere, but it was just dismissed out of hand. I've hired a lawyer. I'm $25,000 into this, just trying to protect my own property between the pollutants coming off the golf course and into the stream, which are already there, because there was a settlement with the Murphys next door to me to settle his issue with the golf course and their pollutants. They ended up buying the piece of land from him in order to make that thing go away. The pollutants are still there. With more water sumping and flushing in the little thing that we call Snake Creek, which I think you affectionately call Mill Creek, the pollutants are still there. They're probably going to end up in the harbor, no question about it. I've hired an engineer to go through all this, and he has. I got this very impersonal letter here, dear property owner. So, and I'm sure hundreds of these things have gone out in town. Now, keep in mind, I bought the property in good faith with all the permits, and building permits, conservation permits, board of health permits, and everything else. And I built the house, not realizing that 5 years down the road, they're going to start flooding my property. Now, it says here, which is a bit of a surprise, the portion of your property affected by tidal restoration is currently a regulated wetland and therefore is subject to the Town of Wellfleet Zoning and Environmental Protection Bylaw and the Massachusetts Protection and Rivers Protection Act. This is where it gets good. Restoring natural tidal flow could change the jurisdictional limits of the Massachusetts Rivers Protection Act. That means I will be losing my land. The jurisdictional requirement from here to here, I will no longer be able to do anything on it. That is a taking. I have talked to lawyers privately, on the payroll, off the payroll. I haven't seen a single lawyer yet that says that you can take anybody's property without compensation. Nobody's offered me a nickel's worth of compensation about anything they're going to do to my property. I can't even get an idea of what the compensation ought to be. I suppose I'm going to have to hire high-price appraisers to come up with a value for this. One of the last suggestion was to pick up my house. Pick it up. Well, therefore, if they pick up the house, doesn't mean the rest of the lot's going to be wet. What about my garden? What about my yard? They've been planting trees on this Cape Cod for years to hold the soil. They planted all these pine trees, knowing that the pine trees are eventually going to die and the oaks will take over. Well, the oaks are taking over. Good. Now let's flood it and kill them all. I don't expect to get a round of applause off any of this. But I do know that you can't take anything without compensation. Many years ago, I don't know if any of you are survivors of that meeting or not. Many years ago, I met with this board at the Seashore headquarters. The last question I asked was, do you plan on taking anything by eminent domain? The answer was no. But if you're not going to take it by eminent domain, how the hell are you going to compensate the people? You got to make a deal. You can't just flood it. You can't just move the boundaries. Moving the jurisdictional high water mark is the same thing as moving my property boundary. You can't do it. Somebody's got to come up with something. I have been willing to sit down and talk with them. There's a letter here, which was, I believe, sent to you as well as to the town of Wellfleet, requesting a meeting from my attorney. It says here, the Nesky property is a low-lying property vulnerable to tidal inundation under Phase 1. How about Phase 2 and 3? Divide and conquer. That's what they've done. In the beginning, a whole lot of people were against this. Not even come along and say, well, you're not going to be affected in Phase 1. You're only going to be affected in Phase 3. You're only going to be affected in Phase 2. Well, Well, at least very few of us left in phase one. But believe me, they're coming after you too. They're going to get all of you. So the taking thing is completely illegal. Moving the wetlands boundaries is illegal. So if you want to do it, you're going to have to do it somehow by putting up a dike on Mill Creek, which would cut out me. Then it wouldn't be affected my property more. But the golf course, oh, they're making big money on this, folks. Oh yeah, they're making big money on this. They ain't going to be against this. And if you put that dike in, it's going to cut off the sacred golf course. So how about the 5% of us, please? Try to remember that. Thanks.
Did you have a quick answer? Thank you.
I just wanted to note a couple of clarifying points in response to Mr. Niski's concerns. Certainly, there has been a long history of communication between Mr. Niski and project team members. The various scenarios and proposals that he described, and I don't want to get into the characterization of them or the detail of them, but just to say that any flood mitigation measures that have been described with him were for consideration of a full restoration scenario. And due to the fact that there were a small number of property owners where the project team was not able to reach consensus on mitigation measures, that was one of the motivations behind phasing the project. And so in phase one, there are no structures on Mr. Niski's property that would be affected by tidal restoration. His property is within the 11 acres of existing jurisdictional wetland that would experience some change in vegetation. I do want to acknowledge that we did receive, just last week, I think the town of Wellfleet did receive the letter from Mr. Niski's attorney, and we've already made efforts to reach out to set that meeting up for further discussion. And as I mentioned, for all property owners, there's an open line of communication, but we prefer to have those discussions one-on-one with property owners.
Thank you. Irene?
It isn't easy being old, I'll tell you. But anyway, I'm trying. There's a letter I didn't get to the mailbox.
Thank you, Steve.
First, I want to thank Kathleen Bacon for invoking the name of Don Palladino, who was so inspiring when this whole project began. We miss him a great deal. And I'm proud to say that I was among the small group that met with Senator Edward Kennedy at the Herring River Dike too many years ago. And that day began my education about the Herring River, what it had been and what we had lost. This project of restoration is a noble one for the town and for the wider world. It is so clear now that a mistake was made when the river was compromised so long ago. We know better now, and with wisdom at hand, we must move forward to undo the damage. Your support of this great endeavor is much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Margot? And then Andrew Gottlieb?
Excuse me, you called my name earlier, but somebody came in front.
Okay,
Dwight
I'm
Esty.
sorry.
Okay, my name is Dwight Esty. I'm the president of the board of directors for the Wellfleet Historical Society and Museum. And I won't read the entire letter because you already have a copy of it, but I do want to go on record.
Okay, thank you.
As the Wellfleet Historical Society and Museum supports the Herring River Restoration Project. The points that we brought out are many of the points that we've heard today. But I just look back to the creation of the Cape Cod National Seashore and how we weren't in 100% agreement that that's something that the town wanted to go toward. There was some opposition from it. It was well-intentioned, and yet today we enjoy having saved this beautiful town, which we enjoy so much. And I'm just hoping that the project is able to go forward and that years from now, people will look back at all of those who chipped in to make this happen and to bring back something that we have lost. Thank you.
Thank you. Margot?
My name is Margot Fenn. For 9 years, I served as the project coordinator for the Herring River project. I'm no longer involved in the project, but I wanted to come and speak in support as a citizen. You've heard a number of concerns raised in letters to the editor and in some of the comments that you've heard here tonight. What I want the subcommittee to know is that these are issues that the project team has seriously considered and evaluated, and many modifications have been made to the project over the years to address them. People often ask why the project is taking so long to come to fruition, and a big part of the reason why is that the town and the National Park Service and the other partner agencies want to get this right. In order to do that, they have done extensive research, public outreach, and follow-up analysis to address the public concerns that have been raised. What I want to stress is that the project is very conservatively designed, with multiple layers of protection for both private property owners and for natural resources. The water control structures that are proposed are state-of-the-art. The adaptive management approach is a rigorous scientific process for doing incremental restoration, and it allows for evaluating both the physical and the ecological effects as the restoration proceeds. It's designed to allow for course corrections if they're needed along the way, and all of that is to prevent detrimental impacts. The town and the project team have done a good job of describing the myriad benefits of the project. The Commission staff report has carefully evaluated how the project complies with the Cape Cod Commission Act and the Regional Policy Plan. I had a hand in crafting the original Regional Policy Plan, and in its vision statement, it spoke to protecting the best of Cape Cod and repairing the mistakes of the past. Diking Herring River was a mistake, and it's now time to repair that mistake and reclaim the extensive benefits that a healthy salt marsh system can provide for Wellfleet and the entire region. I urge you to approve this very important development of regional impact. Thank you.
Andrew Gottlieb. And after that, it will be Katie Murphy, Gordon Peabody, and I think it's David Nowell. Thank you, Andrew.
Hi, I'm Andrew Gottlieb, the Executive Director of the Association of Preserve Cape Cod. This is a project our association has supported for over 40 years, and it's something that's time has come, and it's time to do it. You may hear some conversation later on about some of the difficulties that come and the unpredictability that comes from altering large natural systems like this one, but I want to urge you to accept the fact that the scale of planning and designing and engineering contingency planning for this project is equitable and consistent with the scale of the project. There are other examples of salt marsh restoration projects that you may hear about that have undergone a less rigorous and expansive analysis than these that have been successfully implemented. But altering mistakes in the environment is not like clearing a lot and rolling out a roll of sod and thinking at the end of the day it looks good. These things take time. And because they take time, and because some of the other examples you're going to hear from are in mid-process, but moving towards restoration and undoing long-term insults to the environment, which you're talking about a 100-year insult to the environment that's occurred in this particular system, this project has been designed with the flexibility to adjust to and address the variability within the response of the natural system. And that's a project strength, not a detriment. It's not something that should be used to detract from the project, but something that you should recognize as an integral portion of a complicated and complex and serious effort to address the needs of a resource that, by everyone's admission, requires restoration. From the perspective of your regulatory authority, it's abundantly clear the benefits of this project exceed the detriments, and on that basis, you should approve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but there is a town official who's arrived, who's under some time constraints due to her official capacity, and that is Nancy Civetta, the Shellfish Constable.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if you discussed this earlier, but the public hearing is being held at one of the lowest low tides of the year so far, so there's probably quite a few shellfishermen who would have liked to be here and can't, and I'm in the middle of patrol, so I thank you for accommodating me.
Thank you.
The Wellfleet Shellfish Department supports the Herring River Restoration Project, first and foremost, because we believe that returning an important estuary to its previous natural state will provide a greater good for our community at large by creating a healthier ecosystem overall. The renewal of tidal flow in the Herring River as part of the restoration project promises to upgrade water quality. Fecal coliform do not live in high salinity. In addition, down the road, we know that this will take many years, there is potential for getting back one of Wellfleet's prized shellfishing areas. Add to those possibilities the ecological benefits of the return of a large river herring run, traditionally important to the town both culturally and economically. These improvements would offer the best success stories for the restoration project. We currently have a prohibited area that spans half of the Herring River Basin back to the dike and including everything above the dike. These are still productive shellfish beds, but the state will not allow them to open due to poor water quality. In addition, the adjacent shellfish areas are only allowed to be open to shellfish harvesting seasonally, March 15th to August 31st, because of poor water quality in the winter due to increased presence of wildlife. We are working on increased water quality monitoring with the state to see if perhaps we could extend the opening season or move the prohibited line. And even though results are probably 2 years away, the long-term solution in our eyes to getting our shellfish grounds back permanently is the restoration of tidal flow into the Herring River with the construction of the new dike. We believe in the adaptive management plan, and we believe that when completed, it will allow the project to closely monitor and avoid any negative effects that might present in the short term. And one of the most important things we can do is to be in constant open communication with the project partners and friends of the Herring River. The shellfishing industry has pertinent firsthand knowledge of this ecosystem over time, and sharing this knowledge would benefit the development of the project and help inform the adaptive management plan. The Friends of Herring River have made communicating with and learning from the shellfishing community a priority, and we believe that this exchange of ideas will greatly benefit the overall positive outcome of the project itself. The Friends are scheduled to answer many shellfishermen's questions at the town's Shellfish Advisory Board meeting on Monday, March 16th at 6 p.m. right here in this room at the Council on Aging. I would encourage one of your representatives to attend. Increasing the flow of clean salt water into and out of the Herring River will certainly benefit our shellfish resources, creating a healthier estuary and harbor. This in turn will benefit the hardworking shellfishermen in town who depend on healthy, bountiful supplies of shellfish for their livelihoods. Thank you for considering our comments. We look forward to working with the project partners as the Shellfish Department of the town to bring this historically important restoration in Wellfleet to fruition.
Thank you. Thank you. Was Katie Murphy going to speak? Gordon Peabody? Sure.
We've certainly heard a little bit of everything this evening. My name's Gordon Peabody. I was chair of the Herring River Technical Committee. the first committee that started trying to get the heft and center and balance of this restoration effort. Unfortunately, I left my 20-page set of notes in my truck, so I just have half a page here.
Thank you.
I wanted to share the view from the pilot seat of what it was like at the very first set of meetings that we had. There was a stakeholder group that I saw abbreviated up on one of the slides, but basically healthy coastal communities and healthy coastal resources need each other to survive. I think we all understand that. The moon has given us the gift of tides. I realize that this commission did not intentionally schedule this hearing on one of the lowest moon tides of the season, when a lot of the supporters needed to be out breaking their backs, getting oysters out of the pits and everything. But I hope that that'll be a caveat in the future to try and coordinate with the people that are actually very deeply committed to this. Wellfleet's more than famous for its oysters worldwide, used to be famous for its herring. An unusual fellow came to our meeting, the first few meetings we had. He's kind of burly, and I finally, at the end of the second meeting, I said, well, who are you and what are you doing here, you know? I said it nicer than that. He goes, I'm with the Cape Hook Fishermen's Association. I'm thinking, they're down at Chatham. What are they doing here? Herring, codfish. You know, I eventually started putting it together myself. The other real shocker that I had, I'm not easily shocked, someone from the county shellfish person, who I deeply respect, told me that they had a bunch of oysters they'd put in cages up in the river as part of the let's see what happens, everything. And I said, well, what happened? She said, well, they're gone. I said, raccoons. She goes, no, Gordon, acid. The shells were dissolved. So, along with the fact that my personal feeling is that a river should never kill its fish, I think we owe the children something better. We put together this comprehensive group of federal, state, county, local, and members at large, and the stakeholders group to meet regularly. You're no strangers to long meetings. We had meetings that just, I really wish we had an espresso machine there. And it's really important to give everyone a voice, as you know this evening. That's why you're here. Everyone has the right to a voice. I'm only speaking to myself for tonight. But I think it's really critical to remember that this original study of all the scientific background of the Herring River by all these various parties made kind of a double assessment. The first assessment was, this is brutal. We have a river that's dissolving its shellfish, killing its fish, closing the shellfish beds, and we have a rain pulse event. And it's not healthy. We can't leave it like this. But anything that happens has to happen incrementally. Subsequently, we created the conceptual restoration plan, and that moved forward. The National Seashore, George Price at the time, signed the document that we had that also created the next MOU in about 30 seconds. The town of Truro, Board of Selectmen, signed theirs in about 30 seconds. The Wellfleet signed theirs in 30 seconds. I was shocked. These are not groups that are easily swayed. These are groups that are finally tuned in to all the language of the land that's going around. Everyone understood that we were trying to do something, but not really do it all at once. We wanted to do it incrementally. So that being said, I have a crumb of good news. I'm almost finished. I wanted to leave you with a careful thought. Estuaries are ecological engines. They shape-shift nutrients from land. A healthy estuary is characterized by flushing. Estuaries are also economic engines. This is a river that we've tried to kill for 100 years. I think it's okay to try and give it a chance to breathe on its own. we forced it to breathe through a straw. You saw that little single culvert going in. It's a river system breathing through a straw. Though it may only be a whisper at first, I think it's important for us to work together to try and give this river its voice back. Thank you.
Thank you. David? I think it's Noel.
It's actually Dale and David Rowe.
Al?
Rowe, yes. Thank you. So I'm Dale Rowe. I'm here with my husband David, and we are enthusiastic supporters of the restoration of the Herring River, and I'm pleased to be on the board of the Friends of Herring River. I also have a letter from my neighbor, Jeffrey Stephanie, who owns the colony of Wellfleet, who has written to the commission, and he's not able to be here. And I know in the interest of time, I'm not going to read the entire letter, but he does say the degradation of the Herring River estuary over the nearly 6 decades that he's lived in Wellfleet reflects poorly on the attraction of Cape Cod as a pristine ecosystem. Immediate action by the commission to reverse a century of tidal restriction on the Herring River will achieve positive and tangible near-term economic and ecological benefits, notably by remediating the violation of several Clean Water Act standards resulting from bacterial contamination of the Chequasit Neck Road dike. And it would restore and enhance the water view from the rental cottages, the Bauhaus rental cottages that make up the colony, and will the restored wildlife will return Wellfleet to its natural state. And so I thank you for listening to that, and I also wanted to let you know that I am a few doors down from the Chequasit Neck Road dike, and I'm fortunate to be from a 5-generation family here. Our grandparents came here, and now we have our grandchildren here, and we see ourselves as stewards of this property, and environmental stewardship refers to responsible use and protection of the natural environment through conservation and sustainable practices. And so we're very happy that you're listening to this and supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill and Lori?
Yes, hello. My name is Bill Bewinga. Lori Warner and I live at 160 High Meadow Road, Wellfleet. After living in a variety of places throughout the U.S. and spending extended periods of time in numerous countries around the world, we proactively decided to settle in Wellfleet about 6 years ago. It was a choice, it was not a chance, and we didn't take the choice lightly. Our property abuts the national seashore, with the Herring River passing behind our house in phase 1 of the restoration project. As the project gets underway, we'll be among the first abutters to be affected. I guess you could kind of consider us a test bed for this project. Among the many things that we like about Wellfleet is the opportunity for citizens to voice their opinions at events like town meetings, hearings, and other events, combined with a sense that the officials actually listen to the views and generally enact decisions based on a common good. It may not always satisfy everyone's individual priorities, but there's a genuine sense that views are heard and decisions are made for sound reasons. When Lori and I moved to Wellfleet 6 years ago, we heard about the Herring River Restoration Project and felt that it was not only a worthwhile project, but it was also our duty to become better informed about it, how it would affect not only us, but also our neighbors, and to become involved in the project. I've had numerous conversations with people about the project, virtually all of them that I've talked to start out the conversation with, I like the project. Sometimes they'll say, I think the project is good. Maybe they'll say, I like the project, but, because some of them do have concerns. Those concerns almost exclusively address a personal issue like how it will affect their well, or what the impact might be with a change in vegetation, or how they've built structures in low-lying areas. Those are genuine concerns that people have. I do believe, and if I did not believe, that the project tried their best to address these issues, I probably wouldn't be quite so enthusiastic about the project. We do, after all, have to take care of our neighbors. For the entire 6 years we've been here, I've watched and noted how Friends of Herring River, educated and trained hydrologists and environmentalists, and other scientists and engineers have studied the situation, written numerous peer-reviewed reports, come to educated conclusions about what to do and how to develop adaptable plans to educate or to execute the needed changes while protecting, excuse me, to the best of their ability, the rights and property of people affected. I've been told that these conversations, studies, and reports and subsequent conclusions have been going on for 15 years. Now, I have heard that there is an extensive amount of studying that has gone on in this. I still can't believe that it's taken 15 years to get to this point. That's just my opinion. Currently, the dike blocking the mouth of the Herring River is in disrepair. It needs to be fixed before it breaks and endangers the town's primary industry, shell fishing. You've heard plenty about that already. It is a serious interest that people have. They need their jobs. But we also don't want to burden the taxpayers of Wellfleet with an expense that could be otherwise compensated through the project. So if we don't take care of this relatively soon, as opposed to another 15 years from now, we could have bigger problems. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, the river is polluted and impaired, even by federal standards. We have the opportunity to clean up the river, reduce methane emissions, increase the herring population, and generally improve the environment. Virtually every person in this room has a negative impact on the environment through the use of plastics and other things, putting gas in our cars, heating our homes, turning on the lights. We all have a negative impact on the environment. This is an opportunity, a rare opportunity for each of us individually and collectively to do something that's beneficial for the environment. I hope we don't pass this opportunity up, and I'd like to see it get started as soon as possible.
Thank you. Barbara? Elizabeth Chapman? Martha Craig? Steve Oliver? Barbara, I'm not sure about the last name. Maybe Brenner?
Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Wiley Chapman, and I'm the chair of the board of the Friends of Herring River. I've been a member of the board since its inception in 2008. Our board is made up of 13 dedicated individuals from Wellfleet and Truro with backgrounds in science, business, education, communications, and the law. Our considerable volunteer hours are counted as a dollar match on grant applications. With the guidance of the board's original founders, Gary Joseph and Don Palladino, we have taken upon ourselves the mission of education and outreach in support of the restoration of the Herring River estuary. We have held more than 60 public programs to engage our community in the last 10 years. We're currently advertising for encouraging people to come to a herring count workshop, which we've done. This will be our 11th year. We've co-sponsored programs with the Wellfleet Historical Society, the Wellfleet Conservation Trust, SPAT, sponsors of the Oyster Fest, the Wellfleet Shellfish Department, the Shellfish Advisory Board, and the Wellfleet Open Space Committee. We publish a monthly newsletter to more than 800 subscribers, some from other countries where it is clear they're watching us to see what we're doing and how we are doing it. This is a very major program. We have produced more than 20 fact sheets debunking common myths about removing a dike and returning tidal flow to a tidal river basin. We continue to hold outreach programs, engage with the community, and invite interested people to join us in this effort. My extended family have owned property on the Herring River estuary in Truro since the 1600s, and my very own family have owned property on the town line in South Truro and Wellfleet for more than 62 years. I've grown up on this estuary, spending childhood weekends for 7 months of every year and 2 weeks every August. I was fortunate enough to move myself and my business here full-time 20 years ago. I have seen the deterioration of the marsh and invasion of woodland species firsthand. As a child, I ran across the sand piles created by the mosquito ditching machines as they tore through the Bound Brook sub-basin. My brother and I could start on Old County Road and run, jumping ditches and the Bound Brook, which is in the middle, and I missed once, and I got very muddy. And we could run all the way across to the railroad. So if any of you know that area at all, it was marsh. It was marsh. And now it's cattails and bushes and shrubs and small trees. My mother discovered several treasured patches of rose begonia orchids on the edge of the marsh and was heartbroken when the habitat changed and the orchids disappeared. We remember the stench of dead and bloated herring in the river when oxygen depletion caused huge fish kills in the 80s. We even loved the whippoorwills calling from the ridge of our roof, waking our entire family. Whippoorwill habitat is now so truncated by the development Cape-wide that the Bound Brook sub-basins are among the most important breeding locations on the Outer Cape. And I bring a strong urging to this commission from one of our supporters, Stephen Broker, who is a nationally recognized ornithologist who has taken it upon himself to do more than 50 kayak and canoe trips in the mouth of the Herring River every year in order to study the very important finding of rare marsh birds that now are coming and nesting and raising young at the mouth of the Herring River. And I wanted to particularly make that point because no one yet tonight has talked about the remarkable bird life that we have here that draws so many people. I fell into the Herring River at the start of a canoe trip to the dike when I was about 8 years old. I misjudged the edge of the riverbank, which was just grass that had curved down into the water. It was a lovely day. I dried off and we all enjoyed the adventure. This trip is no longer an enjoyable one because of all the invasive shrubs and phragmites choking the river. The river needs restoration. I've learned a lot in the last dozen years about what has happened to this estuary beyond my own experience. I know what has been lost. I know what the Friends of Herring River have done and are doing to support the preparation and planning required to reverse the river's current degradation and deterioration. I know this project can and will safely and slowly return the tide to the Herring River estuary. We ask you to approve this permit application, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Martha Craig, and I'm the Executive Director of Friends of Herring River. And I'd just like to thank the subcommittee for hearing everyone tonight. And I've had the great privilege of working on this project for the past few years with an amazing team of scientists and resource managers. And it's been a great privilege to do that. And what I'd like to do tonight is read 2 letters that I've been requested to read tonight. One is on behalf of the Palladino family, who we've heard Don Palladino mentioned. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here tonight, but we all do miss him. And if I may, I'd like to read a letter submitted on behalf of his family, as well as a letter submitted on behalf of a family who you've heard mentioned is one of 3 private properties within Phase 1 that would have some mitigation needed to protect their property. So if I will, and I'll just summarize. On behalf of the Palladino family, on behalf of my This is written by Cara Palladino, Don Palladino's oldest child. On behalf of myself and my sisters, who are both part-time and year-round residents of Wellfleet, I would like to express my full support for the Herring River Restoration Project. There's been a great deal of thoughtful, scientifically based analysis led by the project partners and Friends of Herring River about the best way to address the degradation of the Herring River due to the system of dikes that has blocked the natural flow for decades. I believe that their plan to restore the tidal flow would result in multiple benefits that would experience locally and contribute meaningfully in our shared battle against climate change. I would urge the Commission to support the project, as I believe the evidence that has been gathered and presented by the project team demonstrates many benefits with little risk. Friends of Herring River and the project team has led the planning for this initiative in an objective manner, guided by evidence and science, and I believe that they will continue to do so. The benefits that she describes are many that we've heard tonight, including supporting thriving animal life, including fish, turtles, shellfish, and birds, which we know from Steve Broker and other studies that the nesting shorebird habitat should increase dramatically due to the project. The project will also address the existing water quality issues, including compliance with the Federal Clean Water Act and their standards. It will solve a local infrastructure need. The current dike is at the end of its useful life and would need to be either repaired or replaced. It will also provide a buffer to storm surges and sea level rise, protecting local property and roads. And it will also increase the estuary's ability to capture carbon and fight climate change. This project is critical to sustaining the health and beauty of the environment in Wellfleet. This is valuable and meaningful both to its year-round residents and to the thousands of people who vacation and visit the area each year. I'm grateful to the project planners for laying a foundation of research and analysis on how to solve this problem, and I'm encouraged to see that there is a clear path to remediating the problems of Herring River. I hope the Commission will support this important project. Sincerely, Cara Palladino, on behalf of the entire Palladino family. The second letter comes from Tatiana Fredrickson Miller and her brother Carl Fredrickson, who live at 695 Boundbrook Island Road. And Tatiana asked me personally to relay this to you. Being property owners within the Cape Cod National Seashore is one of our greatest gifts, a gift passed down from our grandparents, Harry and Elaine Levin, and one of which 4 generations of our family treasures. As property owners, we recognize that we are granted certain rights to use the property and understand that there are restrictions. We do not own the land, only the right to use it. We think of ourselves as stewards of the land we are privileged to live on, and wish with all our being to tread lightly, live respectfully, to honor the great beauty, and to our best to support the environmental health and conservation of it. We were elated on first learning of the Herring River Restoration Project, and at each stage have been unwavering in our support. We have not wished to engage in public discourse, nor to be lobbied by those who oppose the project. And this is from Tatiana. While I will not attempt to summarize the ecological benefits here, as this has been done so competently by many scientists and multiple agencies, I will say that it is a family dream to see this project come to fruition. My brother and I grew up learning about the history of the property, the artist studio, which had once been an ice house positioned on the edge of Duck Creek. We learned about the dike being built, what it was supposed to accomplish for mosquito control, and more. Our grandparents' collection of miniature ducks, a tribute to Duck Harbor, still sits on the mantels of the old Cape Central fireplace in our main house. Our grandfather, Harry Levin, who is buried with his wife Elena in Pleasant Hill Cemetery, used to say he liked the idea of one day being underwater there. Nothing is forever. The earth is ever changing. We would hear grown-ups talk about how the idea of removing the dike would come up now and then in conversations, and that this would restore the natural landscape to what it had once been. Duck Harbor would once more be a salt marsh. We hope it will happen in our parents' lifetime. As one of the few parcels of property impacted by Phase 1, structurally, of the Herring River restoration for which a permit was applied, we declare our support for the Herring River Restoration Project and ask that our community respect science, scientists, and this earth by refraining from interfering with a monumental moment in Cape Cod's history. We will miss the blueberry bushes and microhabitats we have come to know intimately our whole lives, but we have also seen them change our whole lives. Pitch pines growing up, thickets growing in, open space no longer open. One of the signature characteristics of the Cape is how it is constantly changing. We accept that, we will be nostalgic for the past, and we will embrace the future, hopefully one in which humans do not further contribute to its environmental degradation. Tatiana Fredrickson Miller and Carl Fredrickson. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Oliver.
I'd like to thank you for this opportunity. Though I live on the other side of town from this project, I am very threatened by it. Proponents of this project tell us nothing will go wrong with a $50 million project which involves flooding, raising roads, which amount to small dams, and flushing out a river into our harbor and across shellfish beds. I find this view negligent. There are 320 properties which will be directly impacted by the flooding. Without liability insurance, Wellfleet taxpayers will be solely responsible, as one cannot sue the federal government, i.e. the seashore. It won't take many lawsuits for a doubling or more of our taxes, which will result in far too many of us losing our homes. No one in this town should lose their home to this overly ambitious plan, no matter how well-intentioned. I would ask the Cape Cod Commission if it is legal for this project to receive federal and state money without having liability insurance in place. Proponents of this project tell us the present dike will collapse any time now. The Massachusetts Department of Transportation engineer responsible for inspections of the dike did so in 2018. The dike is inspected every 2 years unless there is a problem. Then it would be inspected more frequently. The next inspection for the dike is June 2020, which means the dike is not about to fail. What's needed here is the truth. What's also needed is a completely independent review of the science behind this project. This undertaking, with such tremendous economical and social ramifications for the entire region, demands it. The Wellfleet shellfishing community should be petrified. Any extended closings will be disastrous for them, and this will have a ripple effect on Wellfleet. I am a small seasonal business owner, and like many small seasonal business owners in Wellfleet, we will be negatively impacted if Wellfleet becomes one large construction site for 2 to 5 years. Wellfleet is blessed with an amazing and unique array of attractions for such a small town, but many of us are unlikely to survive, again, having consequences for the Lower Cape. Lastly, proponents constantly use adaptive management as their way of handling any problem or crisis that may arise. It's as if these two words give them endless solutions. The only control mechanism this project will have is the floodgates. You can close the gates a little, you can open them up a little, you can close them completely or do nothing. 4 options are all you have. But the worst part is the subjective nature of the decision process in choosing which of the 4 to do. This project needs to be scaled back dramatically. The shellfishing industry of Wellfleet needs to be protected, and Wellfleet needs to be indemnified from any lawsuits resulting from this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Dale and David, and then Lynn Southey, Allison Bowden.
I think you mentioned Barbara Brennesel,
Yes,
too.
I did.
So
Thank you.
let me go now. My name is Barbara Brennesel. I'm a board member of Friends of Herring River. I'm also a biologist, and I've studied the diamondback terrapin in the Wellfleet Herring River for 9 years. I wrote a letter to that effect, so I'm not going to read that letter. You already have it in your files. Just want to summarize and say that my 9 years of study indicate that this restoration project is going to be a big benefit for a state-threatened species, the only salt marsh turtle in North America, and the Herring River is the northernmost range for this species in the entire United States. And that herring the dike is an impairment to the movement of that turtle. I was asked to read a letter from John Portnoy, who cannot be here today. And if you give me permission to do that, I'll read it on his behalf.
Sure. Thank you.
I worked as a research scientist at Cape Cod National Seashore from 1979 until retirement in 2008, spending much of that time studying the ecological effects of the long history of disturbance in the Herring River estuary. The condition of the wetland was and is pretty shocking, given that most of it is within a national park. My colleagues and I have witnessed frequent fish kills, including thousands of eels due to acidification, and tens of thousands of river herring during annual and severe dissolved oxygen depletions. At the same time, we observed intense breeding by Wellfleet's predominant human-biting mosquitoes in acidified drainage ditches. When we tried to see if estuarine fish were at all reaching these drainage ditches, our galvanized minnow traps dissolved in water up to 10 times more acidic than vinegar. The ecological and biogeochemical linkages between both acidification and oxygen depletion on the one hand and the long period of diking on the other have been documented in many peer-reviewed scientific publications cited in the Restoration Project's EIS/EIR. In addition, National Seashore research has shown that shellfish bed closures due to fecal coliform contamination both above and below the Checusset Neck Dike are likely the result of the tidal restriction. Most recently, ongoing work by the USGS has shown that river diking has converted 1,100 acres of coastal wetlands from a carbon sink, soaking up massive amounts of greenhouse gases, to a carbon source, including increasing emissions of highly polluting methane. Most importantly, abundant research both here and throughout the world has shown that all of these adverse effects could be remediated by reconnecting the ailing estuary with the marine environment. With the continued blockage of tides and seawater, conditions will only worsen. Based on all of these observations, decades of ecological analysis, and clearly diligent and exhaustive project planning, I urge you to support this very important project. Thank you.
Thank you. Dale and David, I'm not sure if it's, okay, thank you.
Excuse me?
You're right. Lynn Southey?
Yes, that's me.
Oh, thank you.
I'm Lynn Southey. I'm speaking on behalf of the Open Space Committee. I'll briefly summarize the points of the letter of support that we sent. The Herring River restoration is an unmatched opportunity to restore many acres of marsh and the services that a healthy salt marsh provides to the environment. A healthy marsh will help mitigate flooding from storms. It will absorb carbon. It will reduce massive amounts of the potent greenhouse gas methane that is currently being emitted. Improved water quality is expected to lead to the reopening of shellfish beds downstream that have been closed for decades. It will help revitalize the local river herring populations. As a committee dedicated to preserving the natural environment for the benefit of our community, we see enhanced recreational opportunities afforded by restoring 6 miles of riverway for canoeing, kayaking, and fishing. Restoring hundreds of acres of the Herring River Marsh will serve as a model for estuarine restoration elsewhere in Massachusetts and beyond, badly needed to help counter the effects of climate change. The Open Space Committee strongly supports the project.
Thank you. Allison? And then Dennis O'Connell, Martin Ninsky, Jackie Faust.
If we missed somebody here. I think we called his name.
Okay, if you'd like to go after Allison. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Allison Bowden. I'm the Rivers, Coast, and Oceans Director with the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts. I don't have the pleasure of having a personal connection to Wellfleet. I'm here as a peer of the project team. I have 20 years of experience with aquatic ecosystem restoration, from dam removal to salt marsh restoration, shellfish restoration, and just wanted to very briefly highlight some of the regional significance of the environmental benefits that have brought up, including the fact that river herring are depleted coast-wide, and we need all the river herring we can get. So opening up those miles of stream and pond habitat are extremely important for the health of river herring from Newfoundland to Florida. We need all the fish that we can get. And many people have spoken quite eloquently of the importance of the shellfishing industry here in Wellfleet. I'll also note that 80,000 people across the Commonwealth rely on ocean ecosystems to support their livelihoods. The seafood industry supports that many people in Massachusetts. Reference was made to the Gulf of Maine, and those river herring that come in here and spawn go off to the continental shelf and get eaten by those cod and other species that are important to our culture and to our economy. So I'll lend my voice to saying that this project team is extremely careful and diligent. I've been following this project for about 15 years, and I appreciate the work that they've put into this and all of your efforts in considering this very complex project. And I'll just note that the methods that are being applied here are very consistent with what I've seen and experienced in other projects. So this team has my confidence, and I'd urge you to approve this permit. Thank you.
Thank you. And the gentleman I missed?
Thank you very much. If I may, just first a shout out to Don Palladino, because if it wasn't for Don, I wouldn't be here. I'm speaking as a resident.
Your name, please?
I'm sorry, I'm Dave Kuntz, and I live at 30 High Meadow Road.
Oh, okay.
And that's part of the area of Grace Pastures in Wellfleet. I am an officer on the association. I'm also on the Friends of Herring River Board and also a trustee of the Wellfleet Conservation Trust. But I'm here as an individual. My neighborhood consists of 50 full and part-time residents, some of whom actually abut the estuary, and all of us live very close to it. I'm speaking of the High Toss and Snake Creek area. Not long after I moved to Wellfleet full-time, and that was about 13 years ago, I became interested in what the estuary restoration was all about. Since that time, I've learned that of all the well-established scientific efforts and continuous and open dialogue to the public that was and continues to be provided by the project team to reestablish the natural flow of water. The Herring River today is in poor health due to more than a century of tidal restriction caused by the construction of the Sequesset Neck Road dike. The tidal restrictions cause poor water quality, loss of salt marsh, degradation of habitat, contamination of shellfish beds up and downstream. These conditions will continue to get worse if we don't fix the problem now. The Herring River Restoration Project will result in a significant improvements, water quality, fisheries, and wildlife habitat. It will provide overwhelming benefits to the community, including commercial recreation and overall quality of life. I have to say, personally, in closing, I feel honored to be part of this process that will have such a positive impact for full and part-time residents today and tomorrow. And with that, I thank you very much.
Thank you. Dennis?
Yes, I'm Dennis O'Connell, and I'm the chair of the Wellfleet Conservation Trust. I'm going to take a little different approach here because I've gained a lot of education and some of it sounds like repeats. But I just would like to say that we as the Conservation Trust have some land. You saw our number up on the board there with 7 acres included in this phase 1 project. And we are very much in support of how this project has come about and the great involvement that they've had by experts, but also by the public. So I congratulate the project itself on pulling all of us out of here. The superintendent, I think, said there are 130 people here. So that's great showing. So the trust is very much in favor of where this project's headed. Thank you.
Thank you. Martin Ninsky, Jackie Faust, Bob Prescott.
Thanks, Denny. I'm Jackie Faust. Two perspectives very quickly. I own the house and property at 960 Chequesset Neck Road, which is the last property on the right side of the road going out of town, and the main site of the restoration project is right there within eyesight. And I just want to stand alongside. I've had the property for 11 years, not nearly as long as many other people in the room have been property owners and members of the community, but I want to stand alongside my neighbors in supporting the project. Perhaps more interestingly, I took a break from a corporate career from 2017 to 2019 to pursue a master's in environmental studies at Yale. As part of that program, I needed to do a class project. I decided to combine an interest in the Herring River project, my community interest, and wanting to complete my degree requirements, and I cold called Tim Smith out of the blue to say, you have any opportunity for a volunteer to join up with the project, which they graciously allowed me to do. So just want to give the perspective as an unpaid volunteer. The project team welcomed me to join the project, contribute, was totally transparent with all of the work and everything that they were doing, and I just commend them for the quality of the science, the length of time that they've been committed to this, and I think it's just a massively worthy endeavor that we should all get behind. So thank you.
Thank you. Gail Ferguson, Ronald Gable. Is that the guy who spoke up earlier? John Kumbler?
Bob Prescott's next.
Have we missed anyone?
Bob Prescott.
My name was called. Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dick. My name is Bob Prescott. I'm a semi-retired biologist for the Massachusetts Audubon Society, and appreciate this opportunity to come before the committee and the community to talk about this project. I got involved in the project when I first permanently resided on the Cape in about 1974, 1975. I was on the board of the Association to Preserve Cape Cod, and it was one of the biggest projects before us, trying to convince the town that the Herring River Dike, which clearly was not working in its intended purpose, should be removed and the salt marsh should be restored. We had absolutely no data. We were going on a wing and a prayer that people could see that the failure of the dike would be reason enough to replace it, but needless to say, it didn't work. By the way, are there any Wellfleet residents that were here in 1975 that voted for the bridge? Because as we know, it failed. The dike was put back. Worked with a gentleman from Wellfleet, A.C. Jones, but it was the absence of data that made it very difficult to convince people to make the dramatic step of opening the Herring River Dike and restoring the river to its full flow. We all knew it needed to be restored, but we just couldn't get to that point. Fast forward to today, this particular site, the Herring River, is probably the most heavily studied project and ecosystem anywhere. There are a number of peer-reviewed papers that have come out on all of those studies. There are just, everybody has looked at it. All aspects of the system has been covered, and we understand to the best of our ability of what is going to happen. The only other site on the Cape that has had more studies is the Mass Military Reservation. That's a Superfund site. So keep that in mind, the level of detail and what we think we know. I personally have studied diamondback terrapins, box turtles, horseshoe crabs within the Wellfleet system for over 40 years. And I don't believe any of those species will be negatively impacted. And as Dr. Brennesel mentioned, the diamondback terrapin in particular will benefit greatly from the Herring River Dike being opened so that they now have access to the upstream side of the dike and would be able to nest along the upland areas, and that the salt marsh that will develop will be important feeding areas for them. One of the benefits of diamondback terrapins within the ecosystem at Wellfleet is that they eat crabs. They eat black-fingered mud crabs, they eat green crabs, they eat a lot of other things, but they are very important in the balance of the system and in the ecosystem of the harbor. The horseshoe crab will be another species that benefit. Right now they have no access to the upper part of the, beyond the Herring River Dike. The horseshoe crab, as we know in Wellfleet, is depleted to the point of almost non-existence. They have no more nursery areas. We need the nursery area that they would move into, just like they did in East Harbor when that restoration was completed. So we know the benefits. It's really just making the steps to get there. Mass Audubon, we did, in order to develop our position, and we're concerned about the birds of the Herring River Valley, we did our own study. We did bird censuses at a number of places along the Herring River Valley, from the dike all the way up through saltwater, freshwater habitat, to convince ourselves that, that bird populations would not be disturbed, that there were no endangered species along the way. As we have heard, Steve Roker has studied the rails of the lower basin. Those rails were there before 1909. They were there after 1909. They were there when the dike failed. A lot of these birds are very adaptable and will move from place to place within that system. So at the end of our internal review, we felt that things would be moving, but that they wouldn't be lost to the system. The bird that is not covered, and we never heard, was the salt marsh sparrow. And the salt marsh sparrow probably died out as a nesting species within the Herring River Valley in 1909 when it was dammed up. It is probably the most endangered of all of our coastal marsh birds. The population has been reduced to about 75% of what it was in 1970. And the only way it's going to come back is if we can restore the Spartina patens area within the Herring River Dike system. And that's really a key. When you lose 1,000 acres of salt marsh, think of it, 1,000 acres of what would be producing food for all the shellfish beds within the Wellfleet Harbor system. We need that functioning ecosystem, and the Herring River restoration will get that, will get us there. We can all put a face on the project. We all have our favorite animals, whether it's the otters, the horseshoe crabs, the box turtle that exists within this system. But that's really not enough to get us over the top. In every meeting we have, it's gone on for years and years, it all comes down to risk and liability. What do we do? Who's going to be responsible? What are we going to do? But right now we know more about the Herring River than we know about anything else in all of Wellfleet Harbor. And we have to base decisions on science. There's actual science that went on, peer-reviewed, independent. It's not hearsay. It's actual science. And that's what the decisions have to be based on. And the dike will be opened very, very gradually. It's not as if we're going to go in there and blow it up. I mean, many of us over the years have thought about it, but that's not what is going to happen. It's going to happen incrementally. The data will be there. As the proposals come forward as to what is going to be done, we'll be able to see whether opening the dike lowers the coliform count. It'll be right there. So these are the kinds of things at every step of the way. There are wells still permanently in place. We'll know what happens to groundwater. All of these things will happen incrementally and slowly. If we don't like what's happening, we stop. If it didn't do anything, then you open it a little bit more. This is going to take a long time. I hope I'm alive when it's finally restored and that sparrow finally comes back. But it is about the science. That's what we have to make the decisions on. And as I said, this is the most heavily studied estuary anywhere on the Cape. As an interesting exercise, go to the Friends of the Herring River website and look at the model that was developed as tidal flows in and out of the Herring River. It really is, it's just amazing. And when you sit there and watch it, it's very reminiscent of a heartbeat and blood circulating through a body. Well, that's exactly what's happening. The tide is pushing life into the Herring River, and it dies. It kills the herring, it kills the eels. As we heard, it rusts away the minnow traps and everything else that's happening in the harbor. So just to finish up, it's really time we built a bridge. This has gone on for a long, long time. And it's really time we built the bridge and opened everything up. Do it slowly, judiciously, based on the science that we now know, and move forward. So I would urge the Cape Cod Commission to approve the DRI for the Herring River restoration and move the project forward. It's time for the Herring River to be free.
So,
Hi. I put my name down, R. Paul Faxon. Perhaps I didn't hear it.
Are you Richard?
Yes.
Gotcha.
All right. Hello. My name's R. Paul Faxon. I'm a member of the Herring River Stakeholders Group. I'm a commercial real estate attorney, and I live in Old Chequesset, in Chequesset Neck area on Chequesset Knolls Road. So that, my house actually has as its border the National Park Service. My well is probably a few feet from where the high water mark would be on phase one of this development. So it's clear that there's been tremendous amount of work, both scientific and volunteer work, for many decades, well before my wife and I became full-time residents in Wellfleet on this project. And it's also clear that there would be tremendous benefits associated with this project. And you can kind of read the tea leaves. I've done enough public hearings over my life to see that. The real charge, the real discernment that I would ask this commission to focus on is the conditions of approval. That's the key. What will be the issues in terms of definitive timelines to remove vegetation that will be killed by salt water coming in? What sort of protections will be for those limited number of people who live adjacent to the project? Remember, the benefits have been extolled here for hours. They will benefit a very wide community. The cost in terms of inconvenience and change in their daily life affects a very small number. And the commission needs to also look at that group. They can support this project that so many people are behind and has had tremendous amount of research done on it, while at the same time carving out a place for those folks who may be disproportionately impacted. They will pay the cost so that everyone will benefit. So what would that mean? Well, that would mean perhaps conditions that are more specific about how mitigation will occur with properties that are adjacent. Technically, my property doesn't count, although at the bottom of my hill, that's where my well is. It's literally a few feet from where that high water mark will be. Is it likely that it will stay in good shape? Probably. There have been studies. I have general faith in that. But is it a certainty? No. And the project proponents know that it's not a certainty. That's why they've had adaptive management. They acknowledge that this is a massive project on a scale that rarely has been seen. And so even they have planned adaptive management. Now, I think adaptive management will probably result in a lowering significantly of any negative issues. I have confidence in that, but it's not perfect. What happens when that well that was supposed to not get salinated gets salinated? So then we come to conditions. Where will the liability be? Will it be with the National Park Service? No, they have sovereign immunity. They will not be paying. Will it be with the town of Truro? Is this some sort of phantom concern? Well, no, because the town of Truro selectmen, both in the public record of the banner and in a Herring River Stakeholders Group that I attended, selectmen said, we have two reasons from withdrawing from the compact, and one of them is liability. So at least the Truro Board of Selectmen felt that liability was a potential concern. So you can support this project, you can embrace the project, all the folks who have supported it, all the folks that have extolled the benefits. I'm excited about those benefits. And my hat is off to the decades of work that people have done to prepare for this project. But that doesn't mean that you withdraw your responsibility to look at conditions to your grant of approvals. And how would you do that? Well, one of the ways is, it's been suggested liability insurance. I'm not a commercial underwriter. I'm hard-pressed to think that you're going to get one to insure this type of unique risk. You could, however, say that there needs to be a financial reserve, one that would be estimated that would be available if issues came about. How that would be done, I'm not sure, but that's an example of how the commission can say we support this project, we embrace it, we're excited about the future of the restored Herring River, but we recognize that there's a small number of people who will be disproportionately impacted. And even with all the science and all the adaptive management, there is a little risk factor there of something going wrong that will impact a small number of private owners. What do we do with them? We create a condition, we create a reserve, we create a mitigation that will help anticipate that. So, thank you for your time, and I just respectfully hope that you'd consider that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Excuse me.
I'm Gail Ferguson, and I'm basically going to pass because you have a letter from me that was included with the.
Thank you.
Yes. And what I was going to do tonight was read part of a letter from the Society of Wetland Scientists, but you have that letter too. So I wanted to stand and just identify myself as a potential abutter to Phase 2, but I've been a supporter of the project for a long, long time here. And I wanted to embrace all the positive, supportive comments that were made tonight by people who know a lot more than I do. So thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I signed up, but I didn't hear my name called.
What is your name?
John Hirsch.
Well, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. My name is John Hirsch. Robert Meek and I own 25 Way 672 in Wellfleet, one of the properties directly impacted by Phase 1 of the project. I speak for myself, Robert Meek, and Judy Ellis, the owner of 27 Way 672, so I represent 3 Wellfleet taxpayers who are part of the 5% of private property owners significantly affected by the project. The project plans to build a tidal barrier wall in order to prevent the flooding of our properties. Alternatively, they offered us the option of raising our road, but need our permission to do so. Continuing along our road, there are 2 homes that were purchased by the seashore that are being torn down for the project, and beyond that, we have 7 private utility poles which are located on a portion of our road that is being abandoned and will be subject to flooding as a result of the project. According to Eversource, since these poles are private, we are responsible for repairing and maintaining them. Project management assures us that their projections show that any flooding of our poles and the road leading up to them will be minimal, but that there definitely will be flooding at some point. However, projections are just that, what they expect to happen, but not necessarily what will happen, and they do not take into account global warming or the increased frequency of storms of record. This could create liability for the town of Wellfleet and the potential for a lawsuit if our poles are damaged or impossible to reach for repairs. The project team has also told us that there are plenty of utility poles in salt water, so that ours should be fine. We do not agree. Our poles should not be exposed to any amount of salt water. We spoke with Oscar Farrell of Farrell Electric, and he told us that, quote, salt water speeds up the degradation of utility poles, unquote. Utility poles are structures that must be protected by law. Project management also concedes that under Phase 2 of the project, the flooding will be even more extensive. We have met with the project team numerous times and requested that they move our poles underground. This would remove the danger to our poles and enhance the scenic character of the area, which is one of the stated goals of the project. In fact, in the DRI, they state that some of the poles along Chequesset Neck Road will be moved underground for those reasons. As a matter of good faith, we continue to have discussions with the project team, but have not reached an agreement. We have offered to allow the project to raise our road rather than build a wall if they move our utility poles. According to the project team, this would save thousands of taxpayer dollars, since a wall is very expensive to build compared to the cost of raising the road and putting our utilities underground. Due to our location, we are on the front line of Phase 1 and will be for many years. During the construction and implementation stages, our property values will probably go down. We will have difficulty refinancing, selling, and renting our property. There will be dying foliage, limited road access, and impaired views. We will deal with all of this, but we don't want our poles flooded for the sake of the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm the other Richard. Could I just finish?
Sure.
Sorry. Richard Delaney. I'm the president of the Center for Coastal Studies. Just two quick responses to the individual commenter who called for an independent scientific study. I can assure that person that the center has been conducting independent, objective studies for 40 years, contributing to what Bob Prescott said is probably the most studied, best analyzed, well thought out project with regard to a wetlands restoration project, I'd say anywhere in the East Coast. Also, with regard to any concern about shellfishing and the future of shellfishing, our scientists also work with shell fishermen throughout Cape Cod Bay. And the bottom line there, it's pretty clear that a healthy herring river ecosystem connected to a healthy Wellfleet Harbor, connected to a Cape Cod Bay that's healthy, is the best thing for shellfishing no matter what. To raise concerns otherwise would only be really causing a red herring. I thought I'd try that. It's late at night, guys.
Oh, I thought he already spoke.
Come on, we need a little humor here tonight. The second thing I do want to say is I want to shift hats and put on another hat as the president of the board of directors of the Cape Cod Climate Change Collaborative. That group is a group of business leaders, academic leaders, government leaders, the faith community, students, school educators, all trying to help Cape Codders find ways to mitigate our impact on climate change. And you have one of the best opportunities here ever, because Herring River, a healthy, restored Herring River, becomes 1,100 acres of what we call a blue carbon sink. That's a concept that simply means areas like marine habitats like eelgrass beds, salt marsh, mangrove swamps in other parts of the world, all are wonderful at sequestering or removing carbon dioxide from the air. You've heard about the Amazon River jungles. That does the same thing. Salt marshes do it just as well. So here's an opportunity to contribute to mitigating climate change. And it makes it even a better opportunity because in the degraded state it is right now, it has been producing excess amount of methane, which is an additional negative greenhouse gas. So we can stop that, restore it to a sequestering. This is a wonderful opportunity for Wellfletians, Lower Cape people to actually help mitigate climate change impacts on the Cape. So on behalf of both organizations, Center for Coastal Studies, Cape Cod Climate Change Collaborative, we want to add our support to your approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Ronald Gable, I think, is next.
John's going to prepare a little photo documentation for me, but I'll start this way. My name is Ron Gable, and I'm a retired physician. Because my scientific credentials have recently been publicly questioned, I should mention that my background includes a postgraduate research fellowship sponsored by the National Institutes of Health and research that I performed while a member of the Harvard Medical School faculty. My interest in the Herring River Restoration Project has been fueled by concern that when project proponents have praised the project, they rarely, if ever, mention potential harms. However, However, while studying this project over the past 3 years, I've identified a number of problems with the design of the project that should be addressed. One of them is related to the Sedgwick Creek Tidal Restoration Project, which is what I'm going to discuss now. 1 year ago, the Friends of Herring River sponsored a presentation at Wellfleet Library in which an ecologist discussed the Sedgwick Creek Tidal Restoration Project that was completed in 2008. I was concerned that she did not mention the post-restoration erosion and sedimentation that required the town of Dennis to dredge the Sedgwick Creek Inner Harbor for the first time in more than 50 years. When I asked about this problem during the question and answer period, the answer I received was not at all convincing. So I decided to look further into the Sedgwick Creek project and discovered serious post-restoration problems that are relevant to the Herring River Restoration Project. Got to figure out how to go to the next slide here. There we are. Can we get that on the screen? Today, more than 11 years after completion of the Sedgwick Creek project, the wetlands that were purportedly restored are dominated by barren mudflats, and the creek banks are ravaged by erosion. This photo documentation is made up of images I took last June. They depict what you would see looking upstream from Bridge Creek, near the culvert through which Sedgwick Creek flows. The first two images show what you would see after walking upstream are the mudflats as seen from Bridge Creek, the bridge over Bridge Street. Can we get? Thank you. This is a second image facing slightly to the left. This is an image that you would see if you walked out onto the mudflats, turned back, and looked at Bridge Street itself. And on the right-hand side, you cannot quite see the culvert through which Sedgwick Creek flows. This is a close-up of the mudflats that dominate the scene now. You can see stubbles of freshwater vegetation that has been destroyed by the saltwater inundation. One of the slides Carol Ridley showed this evening depicted changes of vegetation in another tidal restoration project between 1988 and 2001. During those 13 years, substantial progress was made in replacing freshwater flora with salt-tolerant vegetation. In contrast, note that the images of the Sedgwick Creek floodplain that I am showing you this evening show absolutely no evidence of any salt-tolerant vegetation 11 years after completion of the project. The next two images show the ravages of erosion on the banks of Sedgwick Creek. Can you bring that one up a little, John? Thank you. And finally, I'll show you an ironic photograph, because this is a photograph that the Friends of Herring River included in the webpage on which they publicized the program that I attended that gave me grave suspicions about the Sedgwick Creek project. So this is clearly aspirational. Clearly, the proponents of the Herring River project would have hoped that this is what would have been shown that evening in March. It was not. Rather, when I went back to do my own homework, I saw the images that I have just showed you. Let's go back to the introduction slide, the title slide. Two University of New Hampshire research scientists extensively studied the Sedgwick Creek site in 2016 and concluded, quote, "The barren mudflat areas within the restoration area are acting as a source rather than a sink for sediment and must be addressed to slow the rate of sediment loss and erosion," close quote. However, no definitive action has been taken during those past 4 years, and the problem remains unmitigated today. Because of the relevance of this unintended consequence to the Herring River restoration, the Herring River proponent should be required to provide the Cape Cod Commission with an evidence-based plan that would ensure avoidance of similar damage to the Herring River estuary. The plan should be based on a scientifically valid analysis of what went wrong in Sedgwick Creek. An important caveat should be added. Proponents of the Herring River restoration invariably respond to the identification of potential unintended consequences of the Herring River project by asserting that, in quotes, adaptive management will prevent negative outcomes. However, this management technique would not have prevented the barren mudflats and severe erosion that resulted from tidal restoration in Sedgwick Creek. The Sedgwick Creek project managers anticipated the die-off of freshwater vegetation once seawater tidal flows were restored upstream of the new culvert under Bridge Street. However, the failure of Mother Nature to heal the marsh by promoting growth of salt-tolerant flora was not evident until approximately 2 years after tidal flow had been restored. By that time, the tidal restoration had caused irreversible harm. The barren mudflats and eroded creek beds. Adaptive management would not have prevented that ecological damage, which remains unmitigated today. Thank you for hearing of my concerns tonight.
Thank you. Do you have final comments?
Madam
applicants?
Chair, there was one more speaker who signed up.
Did you have a check mark? What was your name?
John Cumber.
Then you can get your final comments.
I'll try to be brief because I know people want to go home. I'm a professor of environmental studies. I only mention that because my concern is the environment. I'm speaking, though, as an abutter to phase 2 of the Herring River project. I want to make several points. One, when I bought my property some 35, 38 years ago, I planted fruit trees down in the meadow in front of my house, not anticipating there would be a Herring River restoration that in phase 2 might very well flood and kill my fruit trees. Let them go. The benefits to this community so far outweigh any personal loss I might have. In fact, you could flood my basement, and I would still say, let it go. The benefits to this community so far outweigh the inconvenience, the loss of some vegetation and beloved trees. I love my fruit trees, but they can be sacrificed for the larger community good. That's what being a member of a community is about, especially if a member of that community actually lives in the town of Wellfleet year-round. The other point I want to make is that the problem is not the road over the dike in terms of what's failing. The problem is the flappers that are supposed to keep the tide from coming back in, allow it to go out and coming back in, they're starting to fail. What we don't know, and there's been no studies about, is what happens if we do nothing. What we do know is those flappers will continue to degrade and continue to erode. There'll be more salt water coming into the Herring River, a good thing in my mind, but there's no control, there's no adaptive management, there's no protection of private property owners, there's no concern for the shellfishermen, there's just a general degrading of the harbor as the bacteria from the already compromised Herring River gets further, flows further freely into the harbor. There's no protection for property owners further up because this project has incorporated protection for those property owners. If we do nothing, the status quo doesn't remain. Something will change, and we don't know what it is. What we do know is that with our restoration project, we'll have some control over those changes and some funding to pay for the process of controlling that, as opposed to having been just thrown on the town. Let me also say, if those flappers continue to degrade and break down, as they did in the late 1960s, which required the rebuilding of that dike, the state's not going to let us rebuild that barrier to the Herring River. That's not an option. The option is it'll just be on its own without any control, or the plan that's being presented to you tonight. The plan that's being presented to you tonight is this town and this community's best chance for getting a controlled benefit of this estuary and this river system. And I have two other points to make, and I'll make them very quickly. One is the town of Wellfleet can't depend on our beaches as our sole source of tourists, because swimming with sharks is going to become less and less popular over time. The more we can diversify the appeal to this town, the more we can protect the livelihoods of many people who live in this town. And the last thing I want to say is that sarcastically, Henry David Thoreau said 100 and some years ago, you know, in the future, there may be more streams and rivers on the Cape named herring than there are herring in those rivers. And that turns out to be coming close to true. The fact is, and it's not just the dike that's keeping the herring up from going upstream and spawning. Those culverts are too small for the herring to go through without being hammered by turtles that just sit in the culverts waiting for the herring to come through. We need that herring for the larger ecosystem, but we also need it for our community. It's nice to have a herring river where there are actually herring in it. And the fact of the matter is the federal government has already said this water system can't stay the way it is. We have a chance to make it different in a way that will be controlled and beneficial for the whole town, not just one or two individuals.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Barbara Boone. I'm not on the list, but I thought I would speak briefly. I'm the general manager of Chiquesset, and I will be very brief. When this meeting started, I had a crisp northern accent, and so I'll be very brief. I just wanted to speak for a moment, because many people have spoken on behalf of Chiquesset in the newspaper and even tonight, and I know our attorney, Liza Cox, spoke briefly on our behalf of our support, and I just wanted to add, we've not given our support to this project lightly, and we won't continue to give our support to this project lightly. As anybody on that committee can tell you, we have fought. We have not spoken for a while. We have had lots of questions. We've questioned the science. We've asked them to go back and check their science, all of which I will say they have done faithfully, and they've always come back to us with an open negotiation and an open conversation. So we don't give this support lightly. And we do still have questions. I think Steve Oliver brought up a couple of good questions that we have. And so we don't give that support lightly. But we do know that doing nothing for Chiquesset is also not an option. If you are a casual golfer and go out there and see the effects only of what Phragmites have done to our golf course and our inability for water to move, it's devastating for us. I know there was a mention that we are making out financially. I wish we were making out financially. But what we are seeing is that the slow decay of the golf course and our inability to do anything due to regulations is actually causing us serious harm. And we're taking a huge risk in this project by closing the golf course potentially 20 months. That's a lifetime in a golfer's world. They can go fall in love with 30 other golf courses. And we know that. But we also know that for us, for Chiquesset, that this project is key to us being able to do some things that we couldn't do otherwise, and that as they have finally convinced us that some of these things, just doing some bare minimum parts of that restoration, are going to help us. So while we continue to be skeptical on some points and have continued questions, we know that they've worked with us in good faith and will continue to do so, and will get answers for us. And so we do offer our support after many, many years of negotiations and talks. And so I do urge the commission to see this project to go forward, and knowing that they will continue to answer questions, and that we know that the adaptive management plan will give us an opportunity to get more questions answered as we go along. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Final comments from the applicant?
Madam Chair, thank you for your time. There are a brief select set of questions that have come up in public comment that I believe the project team would like to address. If we could just have a brief moment to talk amongst ourselves to provide you with those answers,
Okay.
we'd love the opportunity to do so. Thank you.
In the meantime, staff, would you like to tell us where we're going from here?
Yeah, unless you'd like to just take a recess, 5 minutes if you want to go to, no, okay. Well,
We'll never get back.
I think you have to hear these responses, but the committee should also decide what issues you'd like to pursue from what you've heard tonight, and what other, if any, information or further analysis you'd like, either from staff or from the applicant's team. So those are things you should consider.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You should also decide whether you think there was a fair opportunity for local public comment this evening, because our typical procedure would be to go back to Barnstable County rather than remain in the town for a continued hearing. I think you took a lot of testimony tonight, and it sounds as if it was a fair opportunity to me,
Think
but
we got it all.
that's your call.
Yeah. All right. Are there any other things you would like to
No.
get in the way of information?
No, I guess I should look at their adaptive management plan,
Yes.
if it
Oh,
is a
I guess
document.
we're ready. All set?
All set. Thank you. Thank you for your indulging us for a minute there. So just a couple of really quick things, and we know it's been a long evening for everyone, but I just wanted to pick up on a few things and hand it over to Steve Spear to mention a couple things. There were a few speakers who brought up concerns, Zach among them, among the shellfish communities, shellfishing grant holders, and the others who make their living shellfishing in this community, which very important issue. And I just wanted to stress, we've had a long-standing dialogue with the Shellfish Advisory Committee, with individual shellfish stakeholders in the community, and that's going to continue. Obviously, we've talked a lot about the benefits of the restored water quality and habitat to address the current problems facing shellfish interests in this community. But we are committed to continuing that dialogue, and I think Nancy Civetta mentioned that we are scheduled to meet with the Shellfish Advisory Committee in the coming weeks to continue that conversation. And so I just wanted to stress that that's an ongoing conversation that we're having with people. There was a reference to concern about wells that had not been identified as specifically impacted during phase one, but folks are concerned. I just wanted to also mention, working in collaboration with the health department, that there's going to be some baseline well monitoring happening prior to restoration. So we're going to have very good data about salinity conditions in wells that are not near impact, but could be within a certain distance of the area of impact, so that there would just sort of an abundance of caution to have that additional data, so that if someone has a problem or thinks they have a problem later on post-restoration, we'll have that data for comparative purposes. So just wanted to put that out there as well. Another comment was made about concerns about the congestion and the problems and traffic and so forth during construction. We have drafted traffic management plans, which were included in the filing. Those will continue to be developed, working in tandem with emergency, fire, police here in town, and public input. So these are traffic management plans that will be vetted and discussed publicly with folks in town. So it'll be an opportunity for people to weigh in with comments, concerns, et cetera, and those will meet all required standards for that. And just to pick up on something Mr. Hirsch said, we certainly do take his concerns seriously, and have been working with Mr. Meek and Mr. Hirsch for many, many years, Ms. Ellis. We take a different view on the treatment of the polls, but we are in a dialogue with them, and we want to continue that dialogue with them. And so at that, I just want to hand it over to Steve Spear. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Gable's presentation was pretty striking. He and I have had a number of conversations, kind of fun debates after some of the meetings, and we've exchanged some information through emails. I live right up the street from Sessoit Creek Restoration Project. And one of my favorite assessments is the open eye test, and he showed you what it would look like. But what you didn't see was a whole lot of other areas within that restoration that have recolonized with salt marsh species. The big thing is, it was an image that Andrew Gottlieb used that I think is very important to remember. Restoration is not clearing vegetation and rolling out sod. These restorations are all a little different. They take various periods of time. Some are quick, some are not. And mudflats and areas of erosion are natural parts of them. They're good habitat for a number of species. In fact, salt marshes that have never been restricted have big areas of mudflats.
So while it was surprising what happened there, Division of Ecological Resources and APCC continue to study it. And I was a part of that with NRCS a bit. And eventually, we're going to try to stabilize that area to some extent. But nature wants to do certain things with these areas. And widening channels is part of it. And the thing about this project is we've learned a lot since 2005. And a lot more post-restoration effort is being put into this. And so if areas are problematic that are mudflats, they will be addressed. If they're not problematic, we're going to let them be, because that's what's supposed to be there. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned from Sessuit Creek. And in fact, that study in New Hampshire also showed that areas upstream actually gained sediment. And it probably came from these areas that are being eroded. They actually put out feldspar, which is a white kind of powder, and in various sections in the lower part, and they found it in the upper part. So there's a lot to learn from there. And there's a lot longer story than we can give you now. But we're all committed to taking in the data from our site and other sites. There's been about a dozen other restoration sites on the Cape, which all have something to teach us. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I just comment that I agree with Steve. He's been a font of knowledge for me. We've communicated about Sedgwick Creek and other issues. I would endorse what he said about the fact that there are parts of the Sedgwick Creek floodplain that don't look like the pictures that I showed you. In fact, the University of New Hampshire research professors who published the document, which you all have in your hands now, and you can see for yourself, check out, I think it's figure 3, that shows that 50% of the post-restoration floodplain is made up of barren mudflats. So yes, there's 50% that is made up of something else. My concern is that if 50% of the Herring River Restoration Project shows like the images that I showed you, that would be a disaster. So I would still maintain that the project planners need to tell you that they understand what went wrong in Sedgwick Creek and that they have a scientifically valid plan to prevent it in the Herring River.
Okay, thank you very much. John? Do we have, do commission members have other comments or questions or requests from the applicant? Yes.
Thank you. So obviously not for tonight, but for a future meeting, I'd like to have a little bit more discussion with the applicant about timelines for phase 1, the impact of construction during that, and also what comes after phase 1. I'm not sure what you're kind of imagining in terms of that. And I think it would be helpful, and staff have been great about this in the past, to start to craft some conditions for approval. And I don't have specific areas. I know that there have been some concerns that have been raised. I think in the staff report, there were some areas of concern that were identified. So I think if we can start to look at conditions for approval at our next meeting, that would be helpful in guiding our discussion.
Yeah, I think this was part of the quote framework I mentioned, the sequence, because the adaptive management helps with decision making. It doesn't really lay out the sequence, is what you're asking. I think I've also spoken with Carol about some of the issues staff raised in the staff report. I think it would benefit from some sort of formal written response as well. I do think we need a much longer discussion and more time to do it, to discuss whether you can just drop some of these concerns in as conditions in a decision. This is like a townwide plan. This is a townwide plan. So just taking one person's concern and conditioning it essentially gives a permit right in a permit for a townwide plan, which makes me a little bit leery. So I think we need to discuss that a little bit more. This is different than as I've said earlier today, different than your typical DRI site-specific development project.
And thanks, John. I certainly wasn't suggesting doing that.
Okay.
But again, to have a discussion amongst ourselves in terms of, again, some of the concerns that staff have raised in particular.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other members have any questions?
Yes, I'd like to thank the presenters for a very thorough presentation. My concern is actually with the staff report, not with the applicants. The applicants mentioned, it took a while till someone mentioned recreational use. Melissa mentioned it, but recreational use has a great economic value to this town, as John Kumbler mentioned. In the staff report, there was a tendency to sacrifice access for environmental, not disturbing the plants. I would oppose that. I would think that the access is very important for the public, because this is a major recreational opportunity and resource for the town. There are only 9 parking spots on the bridge, as I could count. You were recommending eliminating some of the parking spots up to the southwest, which I don't agree with. I think we need all the parking we can get. I don't think in the staff report using the area to the left to the southwest as a staging area is viable, because my recollection is it goes underwater half the time. So it's great as a parking lot at low tide, but it's not great as a parking lot at high tide, and it's not great as a staging area at any time, because what you've staged there will be underwater if you wait 6 hours. So I think we can't sacrifice access anywhere. I'd also like to see what is the plan for access at High Toss Road. Right now, people drive down all of High Toss Road and launch their kayaks from the culvert. That's quite an endeavor, because it's not very wide except in the spring. But what kind of access in Town Landing is planned for High Toss Road? Because that will be a major place where people might want access to this as a recreational area, and I didn't see anything in the plans for that. Also, possibly Pole Dyke may be a launch. A lot of people kayak. Don Palladino and I first met on kayaking trips. In fact, I didn't know he was involved in this. I always thought he was just a kayaker. A lot of people kayak. If 25 people show up the Herring River Bridge on a Nauset newcomers kayaking trip, where are they going to park? And 25 is a perfectly good number to show up and do a trip up the Herring River after it's restored. So I think we have to think about recreation, and I definitely don't want to see any loss of access to the river.
Thank you very much. First of all, thanks to all of you. I already have a couple of degrees behind my name, and I feel like another one just got added. The amount of work that's been done, apparently since I was 2, from listening to all of you folks, that you've been struggling. I'm kidding. I'm actually older. But the amount of effort that's been put into this is just astonishing. I've been in government a long time, and we always joke that it takes 10 years to do anything, and yet in this case, apparently, it's taken 40 or 50. So congratulations to all of you for your efforts. I've got a lot of reading to do. It's clear that this project is astonishingly the right thing to do, and yet I heard a number of concerns from some of the private property owners that I don't understand, because this is my first time at the subcommittee level, and I need to do some digging to understand how that gets balanced out. I know it always does, because I've been involved in municipal projects myself, and you know, there's always push and pull and things that have to happen, and it sounds like quite a bit of that has been going on for a long period of time. That's of interest to me, and also how this project goes forward in terms of sort of who's going to do what, who's going to be in charge. I presume the Cape Cod Commission will still have a significant role once the project goes forward, and there are clear metrics as far as what's being monitored and whether we're happy about it. The concept of somebody gets to decide about whether it's opened a little more or a little less and how often fascinates me. I don't know whose idea it was to phase this, but clearly that was the right thing to do, even though in your hearts we all want to make sure we're all alive when this gets done. But sometimes baby steps have to happen for a reason, and that's because it's a baby that's involved. So right now I don't have questions. I have just a lot to learn, and to say that for what it's worth, for some of the folks that have concerns, I heard you. What that means, I don't know, because now I need to do a little more reading and understand what's involved here, because this is absolutely unlike any project I've been involved with the Cape Cod Commission, that's for sure. I certainly congratulate all of you folks for all the work you've done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Charles, you had something?
I just want to echo Cheryl. You've given me a lot of reading to do to more fully understand this project. So I will be busy for the next few days.
Weeks, months.
Okay, John, I guess we need to schedule a meeting time, probably in Barnstable, and we can start talking about how we're going to put this together and conditions and
Yeah.
answers to a lot of the questions that have come up.
Could I just add one? I don't want to go away with Dick thinking that staff was not sensitive to this issue. So I think Dick did the exact thing staff wanted, which was to force the thinking staff did about the balance between public access, the environment, and transportation issues, and bring that conversation to light at the hearing. So you just did that. That was exactly what we intended with that. Staff was sensitive to all of these things. And I think it made the applicant discuss the balance with that particular bridge, at this hearing tonight. So,
Okay.
so thank you for doing that. We're not contrary to recreation. That's one of the concerns of the act and the policy plan.
Okay.
So what are we thinking about for scheduling?
Well, given the follow-up information that's been requested, maybe the further analysis, I think we have to ask the project team when they think they can turn around a kind of a responsive document.
Thank you. I think we'd be happy to submit a comprehensive response within the next 3 weeks to the
Okay.
commission, or to staff for its review.
Does that put us at, would the 26th of March be too soon? I guess that's only a couple weeks out.
That's only, about 2 weeks. You're talking about maybe the first week in April?
The first, would that be a?
I think we do have some hearings the first week in April. We could do the second week in April. The other thing I just want to apprise you of is we will be getting in another public hearing continuance for an additional 3 months. The period we're in now would end early April, but we're going to have another 3 months, and that's on the selectmen's agenda to extend at this point.
So are you talking about the 9th?
Is April 9th too late, or is that a decent date? Oh, that's a Thursday.
April 9th would work for us, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
It's Passover,
Okay.
first day, so that
Well, we could do,
early in the day is okay, but not in the evening.
yeah. We could do the 8th.
The 8th is Passover.
Yeah, we could do the 8th because,
It's Passover.
oh, I thought the 9th, okay, both days.
Both nights.
John, I might just ask that we might want to check the tide charts, depending
That's
on
right,
the
we
time
better
of
check
day.
the tide charts.
I'm sure that we can find a date that works. April 9th seems fine.
Well, the other thing we're considering doing is going back to Barnstable, right? So the tide charts may not be as material.
Not quite as relevant,
We're
yeah.
going to be meeting in Barnstable.
So we decided not to do the 9th?
Well, the other thing we could do potentially is April 2nd in the evening, you'll have a commission meeting that day.
Yeah.
But we could have a hearing after the commission meeting.
Okay,
Could do that.
yep.
That's up to you if you think you have the stamina for that.
Yeah.
April 2nd would also work for us.
What time would you schedule it? Because you never can tell how long the commission meetings
Yeah,
go.
why don't we do it on the earlier side in case we have an earlier commission meeting, gets over earlier, maybe 4 or 4:30?
So that's April 2nd?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll
So why
check
don't we
the
do it
time.
why don't we do it at 4:30, April 2nd, in the East Wing Conference Room up in the county complex?
Okay.
What time?
4:30.
4:30?
That's all right with you?
Mid-tide.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. No, the meeting was canceled.
At this point, we are talking about having our follow-up discussion meeting April 2nd at the East Wing Conference Room in the Barnstable County Complex. That's the meeting room up on the hill. You go up the steel ramp and you're there. So,
That's 319, it's 3195 Main Street. And as I understand it, it should be a continued hearing,
okay.
right? It's not just a meeting. You'll take further testimonies.
So we need a motion now for a
Yes.
continued hearing?
Yes.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And did we, John, did you want the date and time listed in that continued motion?
Yeah, so it should be Thursday, April 2nd, 4:30 PM at the East Wing Conference Room, Barnstable County Complex, 3195 Main Street, Barnstable.
Okay, now you can say so moved. So moved.
So moved.
Sorry. In a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone who attended.
Thank you very much.